A very good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Sophie with good morning from both of us. Let's get to it.
Donald Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz from later today. Doesn't care if Iran returns to the talks or not.
Rory McIlroy makes history, taking the Masters golfing title for the second year in a row.
Viktor Orban is toppled in Hungary after 16 years in power.
We're also going to be talking to the impressionist and comedian Rory about how children with special educational needs are ignored by the system.
Plus, eat your peas, kids. The plans to make school dinners healthy by banning fried food like fish and chips.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. We are beginning the programme with a war in Iran because Donald Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz from later today. So that is the US president threatening to use the American military to intercept and stop any vessels that Iran has allowed to pass through the Strait. While Trump says the blockade will begin from 10 a.m. Eastern time, that's 3 p.m. here in the UK.
Well, the president posted on Truth Social that any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be, in capital letters, blown to hell. Peace talks between the US and Iran, of course, collapsed over the weekend, with America blaming Iran's refusal to abandon its nuclear weapons program.
Now, we should say there is currently a fragile ceasefire in place between Iran and the US, although, of course, Israel continues to strike Lebanon. But Donald Trump's threat risks widening the war and also pushing up oil prices, already back above $100 a barrel. And that, of course, would potentially cause a lot of economic pain across the world. Here he is.
Iran's in very bad shape. And just so you understand, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. Will not have. There is no way that they're going to get. They still want it. And they made that clear the other night. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon.
How long are you waiting for them to come back?
Oh, I don't know. I don't care if they come back or not. If they don't come back, I'm fine.
That's Sally. She's live for us once again in Dubai. Sally, good morning to you. So how's talk of this blockade going down there? And is it going to be easy for the US to implement?
Good morning to you both. Well, as with a lot of things when it comes to this war, everyone in this region is watching extremely closely, and a lot of it remains quite unclear at the moment. But let's talk about what we do know. We do know that this blockade is coming in at 10 a.m. Eastern time today, according to US Central Command, which is 3 p.m. in the UK and 6 p.m. local here in the UAE. We'll have to see how it all transpires and, crucially, how Iran reacts. But over the weekend, we saw two US Navy destroyers pass the Strait of Hormuz, seemingly in preparation for this. It's the first time US warships have been able to pass the Strait of Hormuz since the war began, and it's understood that they will be involved in sweeping the Strait for mines. There's also a huge US Navy buildup around the Strait of Hormuz and the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is currently in the Arabian Sea, which is thought could be a central command post for this operation. Now, what we are expecting is, because there's a lot of confusion when it comes to Donald Trump announcing this blockade on what is already a blockaded strait. The Iranians essentially have closed it off, made it far too dangerous for commercial shipping to pass since the war began. And despite that promise to reopen it under the terms of this ceasefire, that hasn't happened. Just a handful of ships and tankers have made it through since this ceasefire began. So what Donald Trump is now proposing is that they will block Iranian ships from passing the Strait of Hormuz. So any Iranian tankers trying to leave the Gulf will be stopped. And interestingly, Iran has continued to export just as much oil during the war as it did prior to the war, and charging much higher prices for it. So they've had a massive windfall financially during the course of this war. Donald Trump wants to put a stop to that. And he also wants to stop vessels passing who've paid Iran this new toll that they're charging for safe passage. So he'll be using the US Navy to do that, as well as to sweep the mine in preparation for some sort of safe passage, creating a channel for commercial vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, all of this is very ambitious because it could take weeks, if not well, certainly days, if not weeks, to create this safe shipping lane. But on top of that, we don't know how Iran is going to respond to this blockade and this new naval action in the Strait of Hormuz. They have a geographical advantage. They control the entire northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. Commercial shipping is very vulnerable to not just mines, but also drone attacks. And despite the Iranian Navy being absolutely hammered, as Donald Trump has described many times, they still also have a large number of these very small attack vessels that are used in the Strait of Hormuz to attack any vessels that try to pass. So it's going to be very complicated, and we're going to have to see how Iran reacts to all of this when this blockade comes in a few hours' time. I should say, you know, we've still got a little over a week of this ceasefire. There could be another round of talks, but there is also a possibility that this war could get a whole lot worse. We're going to have to wait and see how this all transpires in a few hours' time.
Sally, great stuff, as always. Thanks so much for that. Well, let's have a look at what this all means for the markets and for oil prices. Unsurprisingly, both sides of this war now being willing to blockade the Strait of Hormuz has pushed oil prices back up again. We've got the oil price coming for you. It's up 7% this morning, back above $100 a barrel. So there's the move for you this morning, up to 102. As I said, back above $100 a barrel. Perhaps, though, having been off last week, I just want to highlight one other thing. Last week, when we got news of a ceasefire, news that there would be peace talks in Islamabad, perhaps you could frame that as the single most optimistic moment of this conflict so far, we still only fell back to $95 a barrel. Yeah, it's off the peak of 117, but I think it's really worth pointing this out. January, long before the war, we started the year at 60. Now, each month when we get those inflation data that feed into what the Bank of England might do, we talk about year-over-year inflation. So we now have the whole rest of this year, another 8 months of inflation data or so, where whether on a good news day or a bad news day, the oil input, which feeds so much of inflation, is going to be what? 40% higher, 50% higher, 60% higher. It doesn't really matter if it's a good news or bad news day. Inflation is going up. There's going to be month after month of bad news in the inflation reports that we're going to get because of this war, whether it's an optimistic day or a pessimistic one. Let's look at UK borrowing costs off the back of that. This isn't open yet today. It opens at 8 o'clock. When it opens, it'll probably go up a little bit. So again, these moves, not that drastic, whether it's good news or bad news. What's drastic is the move from the start of the war to roughly where we are now. Before the start of the war, we're expecting a rate cut, down at 3.5% for this one-year borrowing cost. The Bank of England base rate currently 3.75, so the market expected a cut. Now it's pointing to hikes. Whether you have a good news day or a bad news day from this war, it's going to pressure our borrowing costs higher. Let's just finish up with the NASDAQ 100. This is the US tech-heavy stock index because I think it gives a really good indication for potentially why President Trump is willing to escalate things again. As a reminder for context, this was Liberation Day, April last year, when he announced those high-profile tariffs. The market really fell incredibly sharply. In the space of 5 trading days, it fell 17%. In 2 trading days, it fell 11%, which was somewhat of a 2-day move record. That pressured President Trump sufficiently to U-turn, and it was quite an easy U-turn. He just changed the rates of the tariffs, and obviously things rallied back up. We look at the move since the start of the war, it's really not that pronounced. Last week, at the lows, before the optimism came in, it had only fallen 5.5% throughout the course of the war, to the worst point. Then, on that optimism, it bounced, such that, in fact, it closed on Friday 1% higher than it started the war. Now, the big question for this new blockade that he's announced, if it does pressure things, how long will he stick with it? At the moment, we're expecting about a 1% move down at the open, but again, not very significant, nothing like as significant as the move he got last April, which did pressure him to U-turn. So we're back to one of those days where he's feeling a spring in his step. The market hasn't hurt him too much, and therefore he's pushing harder. Just one final point to note on this. This U-turn, fairly easy to engineer. Just put the tariffs back lower again. this U-turn, as we're seeing over the course of the last 6 weeks, very, very, very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And yet, the equity market, at least, is relatively calm, all things considered.
So interesting, particularly that, the point you make here, good news day, bad news day, oil prices, UK borrowing costs. The main thing is
we're going to suffer either way.
Yeah,
much more so than the US. Even though clearly it is playing out at the pump in the US, it's playing out in the polls, all sorts of areas, but certainly US stocks overall, it's not played out that significantly yet.
And perhaps that partly explains the UK's decision to not get involved in this blockade. That's what Sky News understands. Donald Trump, though, is not happy about it. He's once again compared the Prime Minister to Neville Chamberlain. Well, let's pick up, shall we, on some of this with Alex. So Donald Trump's not happy, but it feels like it's a pretty firm decision from Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been consistently, we are not getting involved in this war, and I don't think that position is ever really going to change. But I think this latest threat from Donald Trump, the threat to blockade the Strait, is a nightmare for Keir Starmer, because all of his diplomatic efforts have been focused on trying to get it reopened. And if it stays closed, that's obviously terrible for oil prices, it's terrible for the cost of living here. And at a stroke, Donald Trump can just undermine all of those efforts he's made diplomatically, going to the Gulf, trying to play a leading role on the international stage, all just undermined by Donald Trump saying, well, I'm going to just stop ships going through.
I mean, we'll talk to the government about this in a minute, but what have they actually said? Have they criticised Donald Trump's decision? Have they said anything other than the fact that they don't want to get involved?
They just said, we're not going to get involved. And I think Wes Streeting was speaking at the weekend, suggesting, I think this was before Donald Trump made this latest threat, but was saying that Donald Trump has issued some pretty outrageous things and done some pretty bold things. So I think they are pretty critical, but just probably letting it play out and keeping to the line that this isn't our war.
Thanks, Krista. Thanks so much. After 16 years in power, Viktor Orban has been ousted from his role as Prime Minister of Hungary. Hungary's opposition Teaser party won the election, and the leader, Peter Magyar, held a victory rally late last night.
Now, Viktor Orban was, I think, a kind of towering figure, if you like, across Europe of the right. He was an ally of Donald Trump, also Vladimir Putin in Europe. And this result is likely to unsettle the White House and also reshape, potentially, Hungary's relationship with the EU as well. Sky's correspondent Ivor Bennett reports.
They voted for change, and now they're drinking it in. This was freedom uncorked. Thousands took to the streets to celebrate an election that delivered the end of Viktor Orban's 16 years in power.
This feels spectacular for us, that we belong to Europe. We proved it, finally, that Hungary is not equal with Orban.
We have a chance to live a life where we are free, we have our rights, we have opportunities.
This is a win for freedom, for Europe, for democracy, and it's amazing.
There were fears Hungary's right-wing leader wouldn't accept the result, but the scale of his defeat left him with little choice.
The election results are painful for us, but clear. We were not given the responsibility or the opportunity to govern. I congratulate the winning party.
That winning party is led by Peter Magyar, who's promised to turn Hungary back towards the West, something that won't be difficult now after winning a two-thirds supermajority in Parliament.
We won not small, but big. Very, very big. Together we changed the Orban regime. Together we liberated Hungary. We took our homeland back.
At first there was a sense of disbelief here as the results came through, but now it is unbridled joy. There is a whole generation of Hungarians who have only known Viktor Orban's rule. And for many, this moment really marks this country's political rebirth.
And the shockwaves will be felt far beyond Hungary. The EU's disruptor-in-chief, Orban was Moscow's man in Europe. His loss is a serious setback for Vladimir Putin. A setback too for Donald Trump, who has championed Orban as an icon of nationalist conservative rule. At the ballot box, there was a record turnout and an overwhelming desire for change, many voting for the first time because of what was at stake.
Yeah, I could previously, but this is the moment when I just realized that I have to go to vote too, so yeah.
Because your future depends on it?
Yes, I guess.
I have a big hope for this election to be different this time.
And what if it's not? What will you do?
I believe, definitely.
But those hopes for a new direction have now been realised, and the celebrations are only just beginning. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Budapest.
Really significant result there. And we're going to be talking to Ivor next hour live from Budapest, so make sure to stay tuned for that.
To the UK now, because 20 years on from Jamie Oliver waging war on the turkey Twizzler, the government has more plans to try and make school dinners healthier, because deep-fried food is now going to be banned. High sugar items are also going to be restricted. This is schools in England. They won't be able to offer unhealthy options like sausage rolls and pizza every day.
It comes with a price tag, of course. Unions say more funding is essential to deliver this particular change. Well, Oliver's here with us to tell us a bit more about what is off the list and what's going to be prioritised.
Well, off the list is things like chicken nuggets and fried fish, so that's going to be limited to once a week. Desserts are going to be limited to once a week. They've got to contain 50% fruit going forwards. And things like chips and hash browns, you're only going to be able to get those twice a week on school menus. Instead, what is being expected is that there's going to be vegetables or salad served with every dish. Schools are expected to publish menus online so parents can check whether their kids are getting the right food. And some of the recommended things that have been put forward by the government include cottage pie with root vegetable mash, jerk chicken with rice and peas, or spaghetti bolognese.
All sounds pretty good.
If they're done well.
If they're done well.
No,
I have to say the other thing on this is still chips still twice a week. I didn't quite realise that from picking up on it. So it's not crossing them off the list entirely.
It's not completely banned, and it will be phased in. So it's expected to come into force for primary schools by September 2027. Secondary schools given a little bit more leeway. They'll get an extra year. But the statistics around this are quite stark. Around 10.5% of all children that go into primary schools are classed as either overweight or obese. By the time they finish primary school, that jumps up to about 22%. And in some deprived areas, that can be as high as a third of all children. So clearly, something needs to be done, because ultra-processed foods is having an impact on the waistlines of a lot of children. And a lot of parents are concerned about this because they want their kids to go to school. They want them not only to get the good education, but they want them to be fed well.
Oliver, great stuff. Thank you.
What's the big story? It's certainly something that I think affects a lot of kids and parents as well. We're going to be talking about this to our next guest, the Education Minister, Olivia Bailey. Great to have you with us. I'm really interested in the school meal story, but I just want to start on Iran, if we may, because it's of big news coming in. 3 p.m. UK time, the US is going to be blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Will the UK be involved in that operation?
No, we won't be taking part in any blockade. We do agree with the US that we want the Straits of Hormuz to be open. We want to see free navigation of that strait, of those important international waters. And we are working with our international allies to do that. The Prime Minister was talking to President Macron over the weekend. We've convened over 40 countries. We've been talking to military planners. And, you know, it is really important that the Straits of Hormuz are open.
So you're saying that you agree with the US that the Strait of Hormuz should be open, but a blockade would close the Strait of Hormuz, right? Because, you know, the idea is to stop Iran charging ships for safe passage, to try and cripple them economically. So I'm just trying to work out, you say that you agree the Strait should be open, but do you agree with the blockade itself?
So the US's ambition, as is ours, is for the Straits of Hormuz to be open.
That's a different... So if I may, that is a really different question. I'm just saying the blockade, which the US says would close the Strait by, you know, intervening with ships.
We will not be taking part in the blockade, and we believe in the very important principle of free navigation of the seas, and we want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz without any toll.
Do you agree with the blockade?
We want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz.
Do you agree with the blockade?
We won't be taking any part in it, and we agree with we want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz. That's a really important principle. So we're working with our international allies to do that. We've been convening over 40 countries. We've been talking to President Macron. The Prime Minister was talking to allies in the Gulf, and we are working across a range of countries to ensure that we get to that point of free navigation.
So I got it, that you want to see free navigation of the Strait of Hormuz. You won't be taking part with the blockade. I'm still not clear. Do you agree with the blockade?
As I said, we are not going to be taking part in it, and we want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz.
So does that mean you don't agree with the blockade?
It means that we won't be taking part in the blockade, and we want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz.
Oh, I'm struggling here. I don't understand if you agree with it or not.
I think hope I'm being clear that we will not be taking part in it. We think freedom of the Straits of Hormuz is really important. We don't want to see anything that isn't free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz, and we are working with our international allies to secure that.
OK, we've got minesweepers in the region who won't be obviously involved in the blockade. If the US is sending warships, are you worried that that could lead to an escalation in the region?
I mean, everybody observing what's going on in the Middle East, it's unsettling for people watching at home. We want to see a negotiated peace and a settlement here. We want to see the ceasefire upheld, and we are working urgently with all of our allies to get to that point of a negotiated peace.
And are you worried that a blockade could send oil prices going up again?
I mean, we're working very hard to see the Straits of Hormuz open, because we want to ensure that we are really mitigating the damage on people's pockets, which we're seeing, and that's a huge concern for us. And so we're working very hard to do that.
OK. Let's talk school dinners. You got this announcement today about healthier school meals. What's the idea?
So, you know, this is the first time in a decade that the school food standards have been updated. It's really important. Parents want us to do it. 8 in 10 parents are worried about the quality of school food. You know, there are health reasons to do it for children. So 1 in 3 children are leaving primary school overweight or obese. You know, it's the leading cause of tooth decay, is the leading cause of hospital admission. And so we're making some changes here to keep familiar foods on the menu, but to make it healthier. So reducing sugar, increasing fibre, and getting rid of unhealthy foods. And I think this will be a kickstart to a transformation of school food that we all want to see.
Yeah, I think this is a really big issue, right? And I think that, to be honest, currently the quality of school meals in England is just not where it should be, right, at all. So some of the things on the menu sound great, you know, jerk chicken, spaghetti bolognese, all that kind of thing, but the quality matters as well. Do you need to put in some more money to try and ensure that the quality remains the same, or even, I guess, ask parents to contribute a bit?
Well, so we are massively expanding free school meal as an entitlement from September. Another 500,000 children will be getting free school meals, which is a £1 billion investment into school food. I also just want to say, I don't think that, you know, healthier food needs to be more expensive food, in fact, quite the opposite. So I'm really confident that schools will be able to deliver really great quality, healthy food with the meal rate that they have.
So currently, I read that the government allocates about £2.61 per child per year. Is that right? Is that correct?
So it's about £505 over the year for a child eligible for free school meals.
So do you know what that is per meal, roughly?
I think the figure that you've just quoted there is about right.
Yeah, and I guess with, you know, rising costs, you know, we've seen it with the war that's going on in Iran at the minute, does put pressure on food prices as well. Are you concerned about that being fed through with the quality of the food that kids are getting?
Well, it's one of the reasons we're so keen to see this come to a conclusion and to get to that negotiated peace, obviously. It's also one of the reasons why we're, as a government, so focused on supporting people with the cost of living. You know, we've just given the country a pay rise with the national minimum wage, the money we're saving families through our work on childcare, for example. We're doing everything we can to support families with the cost of living. And, you know, with our extension of free school meals, we are going to be lifting 100,000 children out of poverty. So we are putting a significant amount of money into school food, but we're also saying that what is on our children's plates is really important, and they deserve the best quality, healthiest food to set them up well to learn and for their lives.
There's just one other story I wanted to ask you about today, because there are reports this morning that the government is planning to introduce legislation that would allow them to sign up to EU-style, EU single market rules, so particularly dynamic alignment on food and drink, without a full parliamentary vote. Is that right?
First of all, let me say it was in our manifesto that we wanted to seek some closer alignment with Europe, because businesses I talk to in my constituency do say to me that there's a lot of paperwork, it causes a lot of problems, and we do want to see that. There are really clear red lines in our manifesto too about no return to freedom of movement, the single market, the customs union, and we are planning some legislation. There'll be a full parliamentary process to engage with that legislation. I don't want to get ahead of the King's speech, I'm sure you'll appreciate, but that will be coming forward, and there'll be full parliamentary participation in that decision.
But that doesn't mean a full parliamentary vote?
There'll be legislation, so there will be a vote, absolutely, and there may well be secondary legislation, but there'll be a full vote and debate on a piece of primary legislation.
So just to be clear, the reports today saying that introducing legislation for EU single market rules would not necessarily be put to a full parliamentary vote?
So we'll be, as I said, I don't want to get ahead of the legislation. It's for the Cabinet Office to bring that forward. We will be bringing forward legislation in the next session. I don't want to get ahead of the King's speech, but there will be...
OK, I'm going to try... So can you rule out adopting single market rules on food and drink without a parliamentary vote?
There's going to be a full parliamentary process here. That's absolutely what I'm saying. I can't get into the hypotheticals about future stages of the legislation, but there will be a full parliamentary process, legislation with votes, on the powers that we need to put these deals into place.
And just finally, your reaction to the election result we've seen in Hungary?
Well, I just want to say congratulations to Peter Magyar for his victory. The government's really looking forward to working with him and his administration. I think it's a historic moment for European democracy.
OK, Olivia Bailey, thank you very much indeed.
Well, you tried on the first topic. Nobly, persistently.
It's all right. It's true. Look, it's a difficult one for the government, isn't it? Let's be honest. They don't want to criticise Donald Trump. They want to criticise the blockade. But I think they're pretty clear, aren't they? They must realise the impact it's going to have on oil prices, right?
Yeah, exactly. We are going to be talking about Australia's social media ban coming up next. Don't go away.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again.
How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Welcome back. Well, 4 months ago, Australia became the first country in the world to ban children from using social media. But new polling shows it might not be working that effectively.
So according to this research, more than 60% of under-16s in Australia are still using social media despite the ban. I'm really interested. Let's dig into the figures on this and find out what's going on. Our science and technology reporter, Mickey Carroll, is here. So what does this mean? Does this mean it's a failure? Does it mean we shouldn't write it off just yet? What's going on?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to look at the figures. So this is the first kind of major study of its kind since this ban came into force. And it shows that 61% of Australians between 12 and 15 years old who had accounts on restricted platforms before the ban came into force still have access to those accounts. And several major platforms have retained the majority of their child users, including TikTok, YouTube and Instagram. So they're not necessarily getting rid of the young people on those platforms. And I think, crucially, 14% of children who used restricted platforms before that ban came into force say it's actually made them feel less safe, which is the opposite intention of this ban as a whole. So when this data is kind of taken by people kind of studying this ban for their own across the world, it might be seen as a sign that the ban isn't working. I think it's important to take it in a kind of wider context. It suggests that the immediate effect of this ban isn't as strong as perhaps we would have hoped. And I think something really crucial there in that data that we just heard is that this isn't necessarily children circumventing the restrictions that have been put in place. This is tech companies not necessarily getting rid of them in the first place, which the Molly Rose Foundation, who commissioned this research, shows that the ban is letting people off the hook.
Just on that as well, Molly Rose Foundation, who, by the way, are an amazing organisation, but they are against a ban as well, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so this will play a really important part of their kind of campaigning around a ban in the UK, because the government's currently consulting on whether we should have one here. But, yeah, I think it's important to look at the wider context around this. So last month, Australian adults were polled by YouGov in the country, and it showed an entirely different picture. So Australian adults said that their children were having improved social interactions, they were having better relations with their children since the ban came into force. So it's important to put all of this data into context.
Who does the Australian law put the responsibility on to stop children on it? So if they are still circumventing it, is that on the companies or is it on...
Yeah, exactly. So it's on the companies.
What's the punishment if they're getting around it?
So they get fines. The companies get fines if they are found to be systematically letting children onto their platforms. It's not on... Children and parents aren't then legally kind of responsible.
So have they not? They haven't had those fines yet. So I guess we won't see this all really play out until it's been in place for a bit longer.
Exactly. It's only been in since December. Yeah. I think that's a really crucial part of this. Companies like Meta, who were very opposed to this ban, before it came into force, warned that it would take them a while to put these restrictions into place. And that might be what we're seeing. It might just be that it's taking a while to kind of catch everybody.
Mickey, great stuff. Much appreciated. We're going to stick with social media, but touch a different story now. You might remember a recent case in the US where Google and Meta were found liable for creating addictive products that harmed a 20-year-old woman's mental health.
So she was awarded $6 million in damages, and her attorney, Matthew Bergman, is now meeting ministers here in the UK, and he joins us as well. Great to have you with us.
It's an honour to be here, thank you.
So do you think that this is a landmark case that you're involved in?
Well, yes. I mean, it was a turning point. It was the first time that a social media company had ever been held liable by a jury for harming kids. It was hopefully the first of many examples where accountability is going to be levied for the carnage that social media is inflicting on young people in the US and the UK and around the world.
For those of us here who aren't experts in the US legal system, what stage, is this done and dusted? Has the money been paid?
The money's not been paid. We expect a lengthy appellate process, but the judge was very careful in her jury instructions, and we're confident that ultimately the verdict will be sustained.
So you're meeting UK ministers this week, and I'm really interested in this as well, because I've been trying to get to grips with, you know, what the UK government position is on this, like how tough they're prepared to be on social media companies, and it feels a little bit unclear to me. What are you going to say to them, and what noises have you been getting from the UK government?
Well, I would never presume to tell a British parliamentarian how to vote on a matter involving her or his constituents. What I do want to do is share my experience litigating with these companies for 4 years and being in trial with them for 2 months, and understand that they will do everything they can to keep kids online and to maintain their addictive products, and only do the minimum unless they're forced to do otherwise. That's what the evidence showed in this trial, and presumably that's what the evidence is going to show in this situation.
Unless they should be forced to do otherwise. So I guess, and I know you don't want to make presumptions here, but that's what you feel legislators across the world need to be doing to be more muscular.
Well, what we saw in the trial was there are many people of conscience within these companies trying to get them to do the right thing. But unless they are forced to do so, they're not going to do that, because they make so much money through their addictive algorithms selling ads to kids that they're not going to change unless you hit them in the pocketbook.
I guess one way is legislation like Australia might be done here. The other is retrospectively, as you've done, you know, trying to bring cases against them. Are there more cases like the one you just oversaw to come? And do you think either just this first one or others will force the company's hands without legislation? Are they likely to change their behaviour if more of these $20 million settlements rack up or not?
Well, I think there's a combination. I think regulation is very important, but you can only regulate what you know about, and litigation will require companies to look prospectively about safety. So I think they go hand in hand. We have many cases pending against these companies, including cases involving UK citizens in US courts, and we're hopeful that, you know, to paraphrase, you know, one of our Watergate felons from many years ago, Charles Colson said, you know, if you get them by their pocketbooks, their hearts and minds will follow. I think the lesson from this case, and the lesson that I would seek to impart upon my colleagues across the pond, is that they're not going to respond unless they're forced to, and that they don't respond to moral persuasion, they don't respond to public humiliation. You have to hit them in the pocketbook.
What would you say to people who listen to this might be thinking, this is the job of parents, like the information is out there, parents should do more to control their own children's use of social media platforms?
Well, we're all for parental accountability and parental responsibility. These platforms are explicitly designed to thwart parental responsibility. Meta encourages kids to open multiple Instagram accounts, calling them Finstas. Snapchat has its disappearing messages. So, you know, what we find is that parents are doing their level best to try to control their kids' social media use, understanding that most kids are more tech savvy than their parents. But you know, parents have been stripped of the tools they need, and so this kind of blame the parents approach, it didn't work in the trial. I don't think it's the answer. And I don't think it should let the companies off the hook.
It's interesting that we just touched on the Australia ban coming into this segment. I mean, clearly there's tons of products that are regulated in a way of having an age cut-off from, you know, alcohol to tobacco to other things. Do you think that is the solution? The simple solution, a 16-year or so ban for smartphone and social media use?
I think that's a major part of the ban. What we find is that the later children get on social media, the less severe their addiction is. The cases that we handle involving kids that get on social media when they're 9 or 10 or 11, they literally become physically violent when their social media is removed from them. And so for that reason, we think the later the better. Looking at those statistics, to me, that just shows that how addictive social media really is, that 60% of kids, unless it's actually shut down, are going to stay on, not because they're bad kids. It's just because they're so addicted to this platform.
And also, I don't know, with those figures as well, you don't know how often they're using it. It might be that they're using it less, even though they're still on it. And it's also a reduction, presumably, from a figure higher than 60% as well. What's your sense about what the UK ministers and UK parliamentarians' feeling is on this? How much of a groundswell do you think there is in Westminster?
Well, I think that there is a natural tendency to, want to legislate lightly, as any legislature would. There's also, the social media companies are mouthing a lot of platitudes about how they care about kids and how they're going to solve the problem on their own. And I think that outside the context of their own internal documents, one might take those platitudes seriously. What we find in their own documents, and that's really how we won the case, wasn't anything that we said, it was their own evidence. They know that their platforms are addictive. They know that anything they do to reduce engagement is going to hurt their bottom line, and they're going to do the absolute minimum. So I would simply, without ever telling a British parliamentarian how they should vote, ask that they look to the evidence that's already there when they gauge the seriousness of social media's platitudes that they're going to regulate themselves.
Matthew, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Matthew Bergman. Now, turning to Lebanon now. The country's health ministry say more than 2,000 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes since March. Humanitarian groups are calling for a ceasefire and pushing for aid to be allowed in all areas impacted by the attacks.
Well, the Secretary-General at the Danish Refugee Council, Charlotte Slente, joins us now.
Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Just first, it'd be great to have your take on the scale of fighting that continues in light of sort of ceasefires, if we put it that way, that have been in place in the last few days.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning to you. Obviously, it is not visible on the ground in Lebanon that Lebanon is included in the ceasefire that has been put in place a few days back. Actually, we have seen since the putting in place of this ceasefire very severe attacks on the southern parts of Lebanon, but also in the southern areas of Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. And this weekend saw a number of attacks as well that actually led to paramedics being a paramedic being killed and other paramedics and workers supporting humanitarian means were actually injured by these attacks. So we have seen very severe attacks after the put in place of the ceasefire, but we also understand that neither the Israeli authorities nor the Lebanese authorities want the ceasefire in Lebanon to be part of the overall ceasefire negotiations between Iran and US. So what they want is a separate track to discuss ceasefire in Lebanon, and we understand that there might be discussions upcoming during this week to that effect.
Do you think that's a reasonable request, that it should be a separate ceasefire altogether to the US-Israeli versus Iran one?
I mean, we've seen the negotiations on the Iran-US ceasefire over the weekend not reaching an agreement. Obviously, our plea here as a humanitarian organization is that we see a stop of the violence and we see a ceasefire put in place and be fully implemented. So whatever it takes to get to that stage, we believe that that is extremely important, because what we see is that civilians are basically bearing the brunt of this conflict that we see unfolding across the region, but also more specifically in Lebanon, that is the area of conversation this morning.
You say there that civilians are bearing the brunt of the conflict in Lebanon as well, and I just wondered if you can just expand on what you mean by that. What are civilians going through in Lebanon?
I mean, since the beginning of March, we have seen, as you mentioned at the beginning here of this interview, 2,000 people being killed, many of them children. More than 6,500 people being severely injured by the attacks that have taken place. We have seen more than 1.2 million people inside Lebanon becoming internally displaced by the massive evacuation orders that are put in place just before the attacks are being carried out. Which basically means that now 1 in 5 people living in Lebanon is an internally displaced people. This is a major burden on a country that already hosts 1 million of Syrian refugees coming from the civil war in Syria, and that also hosts a number of migrant workers among their population. It's a very, very vast task to be working through. The Lebanese government is doing whatever they can, but what we see now is extremely severe attacks in the southern part of Lebanon, south of the Litani River, where hundreds of thousands of people live or lived, because many of them have been forced to leave their homes, have been forced to leave their jobs and have no access to livelihoods, have been settled into to intermediate shelters that have been opened. But due to the vast number of people being displaced, the majority of the displaced people live outside these collective shelters that have been put in place in Lebanon, without adequate support, without adequate shelter, lack of privacy, lack of access to services and items for their day-to-day living.
Charlotte, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, after the break, we will be talking only about golf. No other sports.
You wish after the football weekend that we've just had. But we are going to be talking a lot about Rory, the Rory roller coaster. What fun it was last night. How are you, Sophie? You stayed up to watch it, so did I.
I didn't mean to, by the way. I tried to go to bed, but then I wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't stop checking the golf, and then it got in my head, and, you know...
You become obsessed.
I was
anyway,
obsessed.
You saw it through in the end, and it was just as amazing as it was, not quite as amazing as last year, but almost as amazing as last year. We'll bring you all the best bits of that, and some goals too.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky Security and Defence Editor. The reality of life under Russian fire.
People don't want to leave, even though help is here to evacuate them. They say they want to sort out their belongings first. It's absolute chaos.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety as Russian drones will be trying to find this position.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I've been covering Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war. Conflict in the Middle East is another major focus.
An incredibly dangerous moment. We saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercept going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful.
With global threats rising, I also explored defence and security in the UK and across NATO. This US aircraft carrier is operating in European waters in a deliberate show of force.
This is routine training for NATO, but should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans.
The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments took the threat of nuclear attack and global conflict. Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't.
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hello, and thank you for watching. Tonight on The Wrap, we will be joined by the very best commentators to explain the how and the why.
He did know what he was doing.
Both agree on that, can we?
No.
No. Can expect more analysis.
This is going to get deeper. I think it's going to end up with Russia.
Is war inevitable? What he's interested in is a deal.
That doesn't rule out strikes.
I disagree. And laughs along the way.
Plus, a look at tomorrow's headlines. The Wrap. Everything wrapped up for you from 10.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist...
Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
Well, let's kick off.
And make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs?
He's coming out! What more do you need?
Well, it was an incredible evening of golf. Rory McIlroy winning the Masters again. Jackie is here to talk us through it all.
Oh, yeah, it's just a Rory roller coaster again, wasn't it? Because you kind of thought, oh, my goodness, he's had 2 great rounds. He let slip an amazing lead. The third round went very pear-shaped and he lost that lead. And then what's he going to do on the final day? That looks like the winning putt, which we let's go back. Let's go back in his round and see how he did it. So, front 9 basically was a real mixed bag. birdies and also drop shots. So again, you were thinking, I don't know what his mindset is here, but he'd clearly done some work on the range because his iron work was so much better. He was hitting the fairways, which he definitely didn't do in the third round. In fact, all week, he was so much better than that. And then he just went birdie, par, par, got to the back nine, and then suddenly he was very certain. He was very sure of what he was going to do. You just looked at him and thought, I'm actually not even scared that he's going to fail to do this. And it was Amen corner where he got that two-shot lead on the 12th and 13th. He played these so well, and that's what gave him the cushion to sort of carry on and seal the deal. I mean, there were points in this round where you had Justin Rose leading by 2 points, and you also had Cam Young leading by 2 points. So it wasn't actually a done deal, I don't think, until that moment, until Amen corner and the back nine, and then he just was very steady, didn't do anything stupid, and he had that really long two-putt in the end. He bogeyed the last, but it didn't matter because Scottie Scheffler, who was sort of lurking behind and was sort of creeping up on him all day, just couldn't get it over the line to tie. So he was all good. He had that cushion and it didn't matter.
I don't know what you guys think, but I just love Rory McIlroy. There's something about him, he's so human, he's got all the skill. And then you hear these like lovely interviews from his parents saying that, when he was a kid, they used to be like looking around, be like, where's Rory? And they realise that it's all dark and he's still out on the golf course, like the one bit of light, like practising his putt.
We must go and find our own child. No, amazing. And parents who took second jobs because having a golfing prodigy is not cheap at all. And they weren't there last year when he won the Masters for the first time.
They didn't want to jinx it.
No, they weren't there.
I love it.
And they didn't want to come back just in case it was sort of a bad luck charm. And he said, no, you've got to come. So they did. So they were there. So he was able to share the moments with his parents. And this is what happened.
My mum and dad, they weren't here last year to celebrate with us. And surprisingly, I had to convince them to come this year because they thought that the reason that I won was because they weren't here. So I'm glad that we proved that wrong. But Mum and Dad, I owe everything to you. You are You're the most wonderful parents, and if I can be half the parent to Poppy as you were to me, then I know I've done a good job. Thank you.
Oh,
not a dry eye in the house. I mean,
it's so lovely.
Love that.
What a genuine guy. I mean, and he's so popular in America. I mean, he's such a popular winner there in Augusta. And what was really nice, I thought as well, which also made me slightly cry, was when he'd won and then he had to walk back to the clubhouse. So there's his little putt for a bogey. Didn't matter because the deal was already sealed. He then walks back to the clubhouse towards his family, to Poppy, to his wife. I think we can see that shot where he walks off the green and he's walking through just a crowd of people. And he sort of can't believe he's done it. And his face is just like a million emotions walking through. And he's greeted by all of his friends. Shane Lowry comes out, other golfers come out. Really super popular winner.
And just gauge for us, this is back-to-back Masters wins. There's very few have done this.
Well, there's only 3 of the men that have done it. So you've got Jack Nicklaus, Nick Faldo, who's done it twice, and then Tiger Woods, the most recent one. So only 4 players in the history of golf have ever done it, which goes to show just how hard it is. And, I don't think there can be any arguments. He is probably the greatest European golfer that there has ever been. Nick Faldo won 6. He's now won 6, but Nick Faldo didn't win all of them. He's won a career Grand Slam, which is so very hard to do. There he is greeting Poppy. Who is, he said, it's fast becoming her favourite week of the year.
Now he's going to win it every year.
Yeah.
She doesn't remember the ones he lost. She's too young.
And there's his wife, Erica. But he's had, like he said, he's had a lot of trauma over this course over the years. He's had to show a lot of perseverance. Nearly won it when he was 21 and blew a 4-shot lead on the final day. And it was, he had to really almost rebuild himself after that huge disappointment. But here he is, winning it twice. I mean, goodness knows what's around the corner. Plenty of other victories, I am sure. Now he's just I've done it, I can just chill out. Everything else is a bonus.
As you guys know, golf's not my favourite sport. I'm trying to drag out the golf, though, as much as I can.
No, we've got to go on to the footy now.
Oh, no.
No, we've got to, because you've got to pay tribute to Manchester City, who literally thrashed Chelsea yesterday. And, you know, a lot of people, the chatter is now that they really have the psychological advantage over Arsenal in the race for the title. They've got a game in hand. They play Arsenal next weekend. When they need to win, they win. When they need to get goals, they get goals. Nick O'Reilly, Mark Gay and Jeremy Doku with their goals. 3-0 victory at the Bridge yesterday. For Spurs, though, I suppose silver lining for Arsenal fans, Spurs are well and truly in the drop zone. You know, really can't find any win, any point from anywhere. They've got 30 in 18th place. Above them, West Ham in 17th. Above them, Forest with 33 points, and Forest getting a valuable point yesterday. So it is not going their way, and it was De Zerbi's first match and hasn't changed anything.
Just on the Spurs thing, because I was in Spain over Easter, and we were talking to, like, you know, Spanish kids over there who were coming up to us being like, what's going on with Spurs? What's happening with Tottenham? I feel like no one can really believe the scale of the situation that they're in.
No, and the conversation was always, you know, are Spurs too good to go down? And it's clearly, you know, are they too bad to stay up? That, you know, they are in the...
6 games left.
Yeah, they are in such a dangerous position. And you think, you know, the fact you've not actually won a match this year, where is that win going to come from? How are you going to claw back those points on Forest, who yesterday were pretty unlucky with an own goal, and then, you know, got a point back, got a goal back at Villa to get a point which could be so crucial in this battle at the bottom.
Trying to find the positives of this. It's a very exciting season. 6 games left. It's basically all to play for, all of the roles.
That's
top, bottom,
true.
Europe, Champions League.
Yeah.
So it's that's the only positive.
And
great for neutral. Great for neutral.
And Arsenal playing in Europe this week, you know, that's great. But City are not, and you go to the Etihad, maybe a little bit tired from Europe, and really having to get something.
Well, amazingly, we don't. But we need to change the tone for sure.
Stop being scared. Go do a Rory.
Three
grab
losses
it.
out of the last 4. Jackie, great stuff. Jackie will be back for more sport. Next time we'll be back after this short break with all the day's top stories.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighbourhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Hello, good morning. It is 8 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
With Sophy and Wilf, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
Donald Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz from later today, and he doesn't care if Iran returns to peace talks.
Viktor Orban is toppled in Hungary after 16 years in power.
Rory McIlroy makes history, taking the Masters golfing title for the second year in a row.
Also today, we're speaking to the impressionist and comedian Rory Bremner about how children with special educational needs are ignored by the system.
Plus, the plans to make school dinners healthy by banning fried food like fish and chips.
A very good morning to you. We are beginning the programme with the war in Iran, and in an astonishing development, Donald Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz from later today. So that's the US president threatening to use the American military to intercept and stop vessels Iran has allowed to pass through the strait. President Trump says the blockade will begin from 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 3 p.m. UK time.
So Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that, in his words, any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be, in capital letters, blown to hell. Well, peace talks between the US and Iran collapsed at the weekend, with America blaming Iran for refusing to abandon its nuclear weapons programme.
We should say there's currently a fragile ceasefire still in place between Iran and the US, although Israel continues to strike Lebanon. But Trump's threat risks widening the war and pushing up oil prices, which are back above $100 a barrel this morning, and potentially causing more economic pain across the world. Here is President Trump speaking late last night.
Iran's in very bad shape. And just so you understand, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. Will not have. There is no way that they're going to get. They still want it. And they made that clear the other night. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. Oh, I don't know. I don't care if they come back or not. If they don't come back, I'm fine.
Well, Sally Lockwood is in Dubai for us. Sally, can you just explain to us, how is this blockade actually going to work?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's been a bit of confusion, if not bemusement, in this region that Donald Trump has announced this blockade on a waterway that's already been blockaded by the Iranians during the course of this war. But what Donald Trump, it seems, is trying to do here is to stop Iranian tankers and Iranian vessels leaving Iran's ports and passing the Strait of Hormuz, because Iran has continued to export just as much oil throughout the course of this war as it did prior to the war, and they're charging much higher prices for it. So they're doing well financially out of this war. At the moment, Donald Trump wants to put a stop to that. He also wants to essentially blockade any other vessels who are paying Iran these de facto tolls which have come into place since the start of the war as well, and to prohibit them from passing too. And it seems, according to US defense officials, that the plan is that this would buy America and the American military some time to sweep the Strait of Hormuz for mines, which are causing so much risk to vessels trying to pass, and to create some sort of protected channel within the Strait of Hormuz that could then potentially be opened for commercial shipping to resume again. And we've seen some movement in terms of the US military in the last 48 hours. 2 US Navy destroyers passed the Strait of Hormuz on Saturday, seemingly in preparation for this minesweeping effort. There's a huge US Navy buildup around the Strait of Hormuz, as well as that aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is in the Arabian Sea, which is thought could perhaps be a base for these operations. The big question is, how is Iran going to view this, and how could it potentially react? Iran has a huge geographical advantage because they control the entire northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. Any ships and naval vessels in the Strait of Hormuz could be vulnerable not just to mines but also to drone attacks. And they also have, despite the Iranian Navy being hammered in the course of this war, they still have a large number of very small speedboats speedboats, which are used by the Revolutionary Guard as attack boats to attack vessels trying to pass that don't have their approval. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this transpires, and if indeed Iran does try to prohibit this effort by the US Navy, will that break the ceasefire? There are a lot of questions, and of course we have a little over a week left of this ceasefire. There is still time for another round of talks, but there is also the potential that this war could get a whole lot worse. Let's see. We've got a few hours now until that deadline for when Donald Trump is going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz at 10 a.m. Eastern time, which is 6 p.m. local here, 3 p.m. if you're in the UK. So we may get a clearer idea of how things are going and how things are looking after that.
Sally, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. So how are markets responding to that threat from President Trump to blockade the Straits of Hormuz himself? Well, unsurprisingly, oil prices are higher when you now have both sides willing to restrict the flow of oil and other commodities out of the region. Higher by the tune of 6.5% to 101.5, so a very big single-day move, 6.5%, and back above $100 a barrel once again, and clearly still a lot higher from where we started the war. Perhaps worth just dwelling on where we got down to last week, or only down to last week, because last week when we heard that there was a ceasefire in place, that there would be peace talks over the weekend in person in Islamabad, perhaps you could frame that as the single most optimistic moment of the conflict so far, and yet the oil price only got down to 95. Yeah, it's down from the peak of 117 a few weeks ago, but just worth pointing out how high it is relative to where we started the year. Back at the start of January, before the war, of course, began, we were about 60. So whether or not you're on a good news day or a bad news day in the war, you're still talking about higher to the tune of 45% or 50% or 60%. And it is worth just noting, therefore, that whatever's happened over the last couple of weeks, we're talking about much higher inflation prints here in the UK for the rest of the year. When we talk about inflation each month, the data that we get monthly, we're talking about year-over-year inflation. So we've got another 8-9 months or so of monthly data where the biggest input in terms of commodities, oil, is going to be up 40, 50, 60% either way, regardless of if it's a good news, bad news day in this particular war. What does that mean for UK borrowing costs? It means they're elevated and they're sticky, higher. Good news moves down a bit, bad news moves back up again. We're about 4.25% this morning, off the peak of 4.5, but vastly higher from 3.5%. This is the one-year borrowing cost. A reminder, the Bank of England base rate is 3.75%. So before the war, we're expecting a cut. We now expect a hike or two during the course of this year. And again, small fluctuations in the grand scheme of things, whether it's good news or bad news over the course of the last week. Just want to end by showing what the US tech-heavy NASDAQ stock index has done during the course of the war. For context, this was April last year, Liberation Day, when President Trump announced those tariffs. The market responded to that terribly in the US. We saw a two-day move of 11%. Huge for two particular days, and a peak to trough move of 17%. And that was enough to pressure President Trump to U-turn, to step back from the brink, and markets have rallied since. Well, even at the trough last week during this particular war, before news of ceasefire talks, the pre-war to mid-trough of the war move in the US stock market was only down 5.5%. And in fact, by the end of last week, on hopes for those ceasefire talks, it was back to essentially flat. In fact, up 1% from before the war started. And that might be a reason why, once again, President Trump over the weekend decides to put his foot down again, to escalate things with this talk of a blockade. Because even though the polls are turning against him, even though there is, of course, pressure at the pump in the US, the broad US stock market hasn't really done much, certainly not as much as it did last April. And by the way, last April was quite an easy off-ramp for him. He just lowered the tariffs again. As we've learned over the last 6 weeks, the off-ramp for this particular crisis is incredibly complicated, much harder to put the genie back in the bottle. And this chart, at least, compared to those other two, seems to show a bit of complacency, whereas clearly oil prices remain very elevated over the course of the last week, whether it's a good news day or a bad one.
Well, Sky News understands that the UK will not be involved in the blockade, and Donald Trump is not happy about it. He once again compared the Prime Minister to Neville Chamberlain. When we can discuss this a little bit further with Alex, who joins us now. So Donald Trump not happy, but it doesn't sound like the UK's budging.
Absolutely not budging. Yeah, I think the government's been consistent that this isn't our war. We're not going to get involved in it. The response is all about we support freedom of navigation. We don't want ships to be charged tolls, and also the emphasis on working with international partners. But there's no doubt this is really bad for us, because the more that the Strait remains closed, that's really bad for oil prices. It's bad for the cost of living here. But despite that, ministers are still reluctant to criticise Donald Trump. We had Olivia Bailey, the education minister, on earlier. I think we could take a listen to what she had to say.
We are not going to be taking part in it, and we want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz.
So does that mean you don't agree with the blockade?
It means that we won't be taking part in the blockade, and we want to see free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz.
Oh, I'm struggling here. I don't understand if you agree with it or not.
I think hope I'm being clear that we will not be taking part in it. We think freedom of the Straits of Hormuz is really important. We don't want to see anything that isn't free navigation of the Straits of Hormuz, and we are working with our international allies to secure that.
I have some sympathy for her specifically, because she's clearly not qualified or senior enough, no offence in that sense, to be speaking for the government here, and has been given what she can and can't say to come out and address, but it just sounds ridiculous, I think, when you don't...
Such a straightforward question. Do you agree with this in principle or not? And instead it's just... she's completely echoing the government statement there, or this is what we're going to try and do to mitigate the worst effects, or this is what we're doing. But the key question is, do you agree in principle?
But with an expanded answer, you can hedge your bets. You can not be too critical. Presumably the aim here is to be not too critical of President Trump. But if you say a few more words, a few more sentences, you can actually hedge your position a little bit, and it's just sort of quite counterproductive sometimes.
It is frustrating, I think, when it's difficult to get, like you say, like a straight answer to the question as well. The other thing that we did try and speak to her about as well is this story, which, again, I'm still not completely clear on after the interview, if I'm being completely honest, about whether or not it is right that these reports are saying the UK government is preparing to introduce legislation to align to the single markets without a vote. What are you picking up, Alex?
Well, she was very clear, Olivia Bailey, that there would be a full debate and a full vote. So she seems to be sort of dismissing those reports. But the report suggests that secondary legislation, which is sort of carries less parliamentary scrutiny, could be used to amend a new bill on food and drink. This is my understanding of it. And so sort of wave changes through without maybe getting the full parliamentary scrutiny. But she did seem to sort of dampen that down. But I think what's interesting is how the EU is sort of tied into this conversation that we're having about Iran, that Keir Starmer was saying last week, that he thinks closer ties to the EU should almost be our response to this war, that it could be a solution to the problems that we're having with NATO and defensively. So kind of interesting that maybe going back to the past is kind of our answer to the future.
Thanks, Alex.
Great stuff, as always. By the way, in terms of the conflict in Iran and precisely what President Trump may or may not be thinking right now, do stay tuned, because next hour we'll be talking to the former White House Communications Director, co-host of The Rest of Politics US, Anthony Scaramucci. That's at 9:30, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that'll be worth a watch, definitely. Now to Hungary, because after 16 years in power, Viktor Orban has been ousted. Hungary's opposition Tisza party won the election, and their new leader, Peter Magyar, held a victory rally late last night.
Orban was a key ally of Donald Trump and also Vladimir Putin, and the result is likely to unsettle the White House and the Kremlin going forward. Here is our Ivor Bennett, who'll join us live in a moment with the summary of last night's action.
They voted for change, and now they're drinking it in. This was freedom uncorked. Thousands took to the streets to celebrate an election that delivered the end of Viktor Orban's 16 years in power.
This feels spectacular for us, that we belong to Europe. We proved it, finally, that Hungary is not equal with Orban.
We have a chance to live a life where we are free, we have our rights, we have opportunities.
This is a win for freedom, for Europe, for democracy, and it's amazing.
There were fears Hungary's right-wing leader wouldn't accept the result, but the scale of his defeat left him with little choice.
A választási eredmény számunkra The election results are painful for us, but clear. We were not given the responsibility or the opportunity to govern. I congratulate the winning party.
That winning party is led by Peter Magyar, who's promised to turn Hungary back towards the West, something that won't be difficult now after winning a two-thirds supermajority in Parliament.
We won not small, but big. Very, very big. Together we changed the Orbán regime. Together we liberated Hungary. We took our homeland back.
At first there was a sense of disbelief here as the results came through, but now it is unbridled joy. There is a whole generation of Hungarians who have only known Viktor Orbán's rule. And for many, this moment really marks this country's political rebirth.
And the shockwaves will be felt far beyond Hungary. The EU's disruptor-in-chief, Orbán, was Moscow's man in Europe. His loss is a serious setback for Vladimir Putin. A setback too for Donald Trump, who has championed Orbán as an icon of nationalist conservative rule. At the ballot box, there was a record turnout and an overwhelming desire for change, many voting for the first time because of what was at stake.
Yeah, I could previously, but this is the moment when I just realized that I have to go to vote too, so yeah.
Because your future depends on it?
Yes, I guess.
I have a big hope for this election to be different this time.
And what if it's not? What will you do?
I believe, definitely.
But those hopes for a new direction have now been realised, and the celebrations are only just beginning.
Well, Ivor joins us live from Budapest. Ivor, very good morning to you. Extraordinary result, the scale of it in particular. Just quickly, what does he stand for, the new Prime Minister, Mr. Magyar? Is he very different from Orbán in all respects?
Well, look, he's still considered a conservative. He's centre-right, but he is light and day compared to Viktor Orbán. That's how people here feel. He is promising to boost the economy, reduce corruption, and basically pivot Hungary back towards the West and back towards Europe. So he's considered, light and day compared to Viktor Orbán. I think there'll be quite a few sore heads here in Budapest this morning because the celebrations went long into the night. The music was blaring, the drinks were flowing, people were dancing in the streets. A really incredible atmosphere because people here really believe that they have reclaimed their freedom and reclaimed their future. After what was really a trouncing of Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party at the polls, the opposition, as I say, led by Peter Magyar, won a supermajority in Parliament, meaning they can change the constitution and undo the damage they say has been caused by Orbán. So truly historic moment for Hungary, but also for Europe, as I said in my report, because of what Viktor Orbán represents, an icon of national conservatism. For the likes of Donald Trump, this is an ideological setback. But for Vladimir Putin, this is a real strategic loss because he was considered, Viktor Orbán was considered in Europe as Russia's Trojan horse, often acting in Russia's interests over Europe's. He was consistently blocking and opposing aid to Ukraine. He was consistently trying to derail and slow down sanctions on Moscow. So this is a real loss for the Kremlin, and I expect we'll get reaction from the Kremlin later today. But Europe, being no doubt, they will be celebrating this result in Brussels today because a persistent thorn in their side has finally been removed after 16 long years.
Well, Ivor, just quickly, the final point on that. How quickly can the EU put that loan to Ukraine back on the table to be voted on?
Well, Peter Magyar, in his address to his supporters last night, said that is a real priority. He's going to, first of all, his first trip out of Hungary is going to be to Poland. And then after that, it's going to be Vienna and then Brussels. And he said the priority is to unlock those frozen EU frozen EU funding to boost the economy here. It was frozen because of all the dismantling of democratic checks and balances by the Orban government here. And clearly that was part of his campaign strategy to reinstate those checks and balances, or promise at least to get that done. I think the dialogue with Brussels will begin very, very quickly. Ursula von der Leyen gave her reaction last night saying that Hungary had voted for Europe. I think given that this is what both sides want, I think it will be fairly easy to do, and especially because the new Prime Minister has a supermajority in Hungary's parliament.
Ivor, thank you very much indeed, Ivor Bennett, speaking to us there. Well, pleased to say that next on the programme is the leader of the Conservative Party, Cameron Badenoch. Great to have you here with us today. So much to discuss, as always. I did just want to start with Iran, if I may, because Donald Trump has said the US is going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz starting at 3 p.m. UK time. Is that something the UK should be getting involved in?
Well, what I've said is if you break it, you own it. What's unclear to us is what his strategy is. And I don't think that if the strategy is unclear, we should be getting involved. What I want Keir Starmer to do is focus on the national interest, deal with things that he can handle domestically. If there's a problem with oil supplies, let's drill our own oil and gas in the North Sea. That's what I would be focusing on right now if I was Prime Minister.
So you're saying that there doesn't seem to be a clear plan from Donald Trump, and obviously blocking the Strait completely is going to lead to presumably higher oil prices as well. So do you think it's a bad idea for America to be doing it?
Well, it's quite clear that there is a problem that needs solving. There is a war between the US and Iran. Obviously, Iran is an enemy of our country. We are on the side of the United States in that, but there needs to be a plan. Iran is already carrying out a blockade of those straits. It's having an impact globally. It will eventually have an impact in Europe and in the United Kingdom. We're already seeing some of that. What is the solution? Something needs to be done. However, I'm not in a position to give operational sort of suggestions on what should be happening. I'm not privy to those details. So I can only talk about what is very clear, and that is that we are causing even more damage by not harnessing our own oil supplies at a time when we can see oil and gas supplies across the world just shrinking.
I mean, you've been pretty scathing about the state of the military. Could we get involved in this blockade even if we wanted to?
Well, this is one of the things that I was talking about on Saturday at the London Defence Conference. I gave a speech where I said, before the war in Ukraine, we were able to send munitions support, whereas with this war, it took 2 weeks to get HMS Dragon out of Portsmouth. What's happened? What's happened to all those plans? Where is the defence investment plan? Where is the money? The Prime Minister keeps talking about how he's increasing defence spending, but it's all words. There has been no action at all since he came in.
But you take responsibility from the previous Conservative administration as well, right? For not spending enough on defence.
Defence spending went down from 1989 to 2022. Actually, when I was in Cabinet, we increased defence spending. And I can't take responsibility for what my predecessors did. They have to do that. I don't have a time machine. What I can do is say what the Conservative Party will do now. Mistakes were made in the past. I'm not going to repeat those mistakes. We need to start spending money on defence. That's why we found money for a sovereign defence fund, putting the two-child benefit cap back in place so we can have more troops. We've got a plan to 3%. Labour don't.
You also want to recruit 6,000 more soldiers. I mean, can you see a situation where you might back some kind of conscription? I mean, we've seen that in other countries.
I don't think we need conscription. What we need to do is make sure that we incentivise people to go into our armed forces. That means better pay, better equipment. And that's what the money from the two-child benefit cap can do. We talked about getting an extra 20,000, 14,000 reservists, 6,000 regulars. But I don't think we need to be talking about conscription. Let's make sure that we actually look after the troops that we've got. We could stop persecuting them. Labour's Troubles Bill, for example, just hounding veterans endlessly. That's the kind of thing that puts people off joining the army.
Now you wrote an article this weekend about a collapse of consequences, and you said that is what has led to scenes like the looting that we saw in Clapham in South London. Now, there are a few themes in this that I'm keen to pick up on, actually. But first, I just wanted to clear one thing up, because you said, while the majority of young looters in Clapham seem to have Caribbean or African heritage, the fact is that children in Lagos and Nairobi don't behave that way. You're not saying that Lagos is a safer city than London, though, right?
No, of course not. What I'm saying is that you don't see children looting for fun. What we saw in Clapham was young people basically saying, we know nothing's going to happen and we don't care. Consequences matter. It's not about the safety of cities, it's about the behaviour. It's about the behaviour of young people. That's quite important.
And I'm keen to talk about that as well. But just to be, I'm not saying London is safe, right? But I've lived in London my whole life.
It's a relatively safe city. But things are getting worse.
Is safe, right? If you look at, Lagos, for example, the World Population Review says personal security, London is at 20.
As I said, this is not a comment about the security. I've been very, very vocal about problems in African countries, Nigeria especially. But it is clear that when you look at the behaviour of children, you do not see young children running around looting, laughing, filming themselves in places where they know they won't get away with it. This is about stopping people from getting away with things. If you do not punish, if you don't catch criminals, if you allow shoplifting to happen and effectively decriminalise it, expect it to get worse. And what I'm saying is that those people who want to point out the race of those children, it's got nothing to do with their race. It's the fact that when when bad behaviour happens, people aren't punished. If you don't punish bad behaviour, you will get more of it.
You say in the article, in Nigeria and Kenya, the boundaries are clear and actions have consequences. Parents, communities and authorities do not wring their hands or look the other way. Now, look, we know the arguments about authorities. They're being quite well rehearsed. I'm interested in what you mean when it comes to parents. Do you think, soft parenting is partly to blame here?
Well, I mean, we could have a whole session on what we mean by soft parenting, but parents need to know where their children are. They need to give them boundaries, and they need to make sure that they also enforce discipline in the household. I don't know what the parents of those children were doing or saying, but if I found out that one of my kids was out there, they would be in a lot of trouble. That's the sort of thing that we need parents to do. We don't want them to just assume that, well, if the police aren't saying anything, it doesn't matter. We need people to be looking after their children. Personal responsibility is critical if we're going to have a functioning society.
And do you think that's part of the problem in the UK? Parents not, taking responsibility in enforcing that discipline?
So I think that we should be finding out where the parents are in this. I don't know what those parents were doing, but I do know that the authorities weren't doing very much. So that was particularly an article about where are the police? What is society going to do about this sort of behaviour? If we condone it, it's only going to get more. And everybody has a part to play. Parents, teachers, the police, and even government. But assuming that government can fix everything, I don't think is the right way of going about it.
What about absent dads? Do we need to start talking about that as well?
Again, I don't know whether those parents had their fathers at home or not at home, but a family with two parents in the household is easier in terms of looking after, in terms of looking after children. It's very difficult being a single parent, however that happened. So, of course, we don't want to see fathers walking out of their children's life. Mothers, less likely to do it. It does happen as well. We want to see both parents looking after their children, but properly enforcing discipline, personal responsibility, giving them boundaries, even moral sort of instruction. What is good, what is bad, how to behave. But what those scenes in Clapham showed me was that lots of young people, and let's be frank, adults as well, people just think that they can do stuff and get away with it. They go into shops, take things, they walk out. We see endless videos of it. They're laughing in the face of authority. And what I would like to see is the government doing something about it. That's why we've got a campaign to take back our streets. More police officers, yes. Immediate justice. If you spray graffiti, you've got to clean it up, not get someone from the council, to do it. Let's have a little bit more of that.
We haven't got much time left. There's just a couple of other things I did want to ask you about as well. You're criticising Keir Starmer and also some institutions for not implementing the Supreme Court ruling about gender relating to biological sex.
Yes.
Who specifically are you talking about here? What organisations are not implementing the law?
NHS trusts, classic example. They haven't issued guidance. I've met so many nurses, Sandy Peggy, Jennifer Millay, the Darlington nurses, all of them failed by NHS trusts that are effectively breaking the law. These women are winning their cases. The guidance has not come out, either from the Department of Health, where Streeting hasn't done anything, Bridget Phillipson hasn't done anything. That's because they don't want to do anything. Keir Starmer doesn't want to do anything.
I guess they would say that they need to get it right. It's really important for them to look at it and to get it right, and because there are vulnerable people who are involved in this.
The Supreme Court has reaffirmed the law as it always stood. This is not a complicated thing. This is not complicated. I remember working on guidance in government. It's not complicated. Anyone saying they don't know how to get it right from, having women's dignity and privacy should not be in government. This is not complicated.
Just very finally, there have been reports out today saying that the government is preparing to align with a single market, particularly in relation to food and drink, without a parliamentary vote. We spoke to the government earlier. It seemed like there is going to be some kind of vote on any change. If it helps growth, if it helps bring down food prices, is it a good thing to move a bit closer to the EU?
The problem is it's the worst of both worlds. It won't help growth. Why should we be out of the EU, able to make our own choices, and not take those decisions?
It would help growth, wouldn't it? Reducing paperwork.
It's the worst of both worlds.
That would help growth.
So, but what happens if? Remember, we are a competing economy. Taking EU rules without having a vote on them is completely wrong. If you want to be in the EU, come out and say, we want to go back into the EU. That's what they're not brave enough to do. So they're picking this weird hybrid, which is the worst of both worlds. It's not in the EU, it's not out, it's just doing whatever the EU is doing.
Well, they would say it's the best of both worlds, right? They would say that it is, closer alignment and smoother trade, but also...
No, it's the worst of both worlds. And we lose certain things. So, for instance, our cheap power plan to scrap VAT on bills, we wouldn't be able to do that. EU rules don't allow that. We've got a fuel crisis right now. Our planes are able to carry more fuel from foreign countries, not in the EU. EU countries aren't allowed to do that. We'd have to sign up to that. There are all sorts of bad things that they would smuggle in. This is really the result of a government that's run out of ideas. They came in, we'll take the winter fuel, we'll tax private schools, do a bit of assisted dying. They've run out of ideas. And this is them just looking to the past rather than looking to the future. We've got much better ideas that will actually create growth.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much. Good to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservatives. Coming up next, we are going to be talking about the royal family. We've got a man called Robert Harbin on next, who has a biography to talk to us about the late Queen.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter.
I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story.
The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget.
Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Welcome back. Well, despite the current tense relationship between the US and the UK, the King and Queen will visit the US later this month.
Donald Trump has said he is looking forward to spending time with the King. Said to be a fan, isn't he?
Let's talk about that and much more with the royal biographer Robert Hardman, who has a new book out about Queen Elizabeth II in private and in public, her inside story. A very good morning to you, Robert.
Thanks. Morning. Thank you.
We'll come to the state visit in just a second, but as part of this book, you spoke to President Trump about the latest.
Yeah, I went out to Mar-a-Lago 3.5 months ago. He's one of the last people I interviewed for the book, actually, and had several conversations with him because he was a huge fan of hers. I mean, genuinely a great devotee. He kept using the word unbelievable and had very sort of fond memories of her. But he's a big fan of all the monarchy, and it was slightly surreal sitting there at Mar-a-Lago chatting to him. It was a couple of days before he invaded Venezuela. He didn't tell me anything about that, unfortunately, but we spoke at length, and he particularly remembered his first meeting with her, which was in 2018 when he came for tea at Windsor Castle, and it was meant to be a sort of 15-minute in and out, and they ended up chatting for the best part of an hour, and they did hit it off because they both have Scottish mothers. And that's a big thing. You know, Trump's mother was from the Isle of Lewis. She was a MacLeod, and obviously they both have sort of Scottish interests. Balmoral in her case, and some golf courses in his. So it was a friendly meeting, and then the next year he came on his state visit to the UK, and that was the Queen's last state visit. So in her whole reign, over 100 state visitors, he was the last.
I'm really interested about what was and wasn't discussed. I don't know how much you opened up in that 1 hour meeting, and whether ahead of the state visit, where King Charles obviously has quite a tense situation to navigate, with a closed door conversation with someone the president respects over an hour, did the monarch push him on any of these topics? Did he listen, do we think? Is King Charles going to do the same behind closed doors or not?
Well, I mean, it was a very different set of circumstances when Trump came on his first state visit, because he'd come over, it was the eve of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, so there was a lot of that. I mean, what tends to happen when you get these moments, and you know, these are the two heads of state, the king and the president are heads of state. They're talking on sort of broader issues that sort of connect, sort of shared bonds, shared sacrifices. You know, the things that bring the peoples of America and Britain together. So there won't be discussion about sort of the technicalities of whatever's going on in Iran. I mean, whenever you go on a state visit as a monarch, you always take the foreign secretary with you. And then if anything tricky comes up politically, you go, oh, it's a very interesting question. Perhaps you'd like to talk to my foreign secretary about that. So Yvette Cooper will be there to handle the inevitable hardball questions. But I mean, the main thrust of this state visit is always been, since it was planned, was to mark the 250th anniversary of the US, when they kicked out the King's great ×5 grandfather, George III. And that's going to be the sort of subtext and reflecting on all the things that have happened since then. So it might be D-Day, the Second World War, the First World War. I mean, all those things will be strong issues. And of course, this huge elephant in the room will be, and well, there'll be several elephants in the room, actually. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, you've got the sort of Prince Andrew question, you've got the war question, but all that gets parked, and you just have this sort of warm glow of sort of bilateral bonhomie, really.
Mm-hmm. You said in the book that it was respect for the Queen that led to Donald Trump dropping his plan to annex Canada. Is that right?
Well, that's certainly how it came across. We at one point we were talking about Canada, He'd actually said, what were my thoughts on invading Greenland? And I said,
he said that to you?
Yes, and I said, I don't think it's a very good idea.
Well, maybe you can take credit for that.
No, I'm not taking any credit for any of this. I mean, it was a sort of informal chat. It wasn't a sort of formal sit-down interview. But he did say, well, what about Greenland? I said, no, that would be a very bad idea vis-à-vis NATO. And while we're at it, let's leave Canada alone, because Canada has been a staunch ally to both the US and Britain through the worst moments of the last couple of centuries. And he reflected, and I said, the King of Canada probably would get quite upset if America invaded Canada in a sort of light-hearted way. And he went, yeah, well, they still take that seriously. I said, yeah, they do. It's a big deal in Canada. And he went, OK, well, they've got all that history. He said they've got that "Oh Canada" thing, their great anthem. And he said, I guess it's not going to happen in the next 3.5 years. So that was a sort of, to me, that seemed to be an acknowledgement that Canada is going to remain Canadian.
Sounds like we shouldn't send Yvette Cooper, we should send Robert.
No, it was purely, I mean, he didn't name me from Adam. It was purely because he loves the monarchy, of course.
You've obviously written about Queen Elizabeth a few times and covered her very closely. Does her legacy shine brighter or dim a bit as the years have passed and as you've reflected on it this time around?
Well, I mean, inevitably it's coming under a bit of stress, strain, if you like, at the moment because of the whole Andrew Epstein thing. People saying, well, why didn't the Queen do more? And that's a question I suspect if she was still with us, she would ask herself. I mean, I think the point to make is that there were an awful lot of people who were who could have done more to rein in, say, Prince Andrew. But I think in the overall picture, and this is a 70-year reign, a record-breaking reign, and you look at how she steered the country. I'm particularly interested in those moments when things weren't going so well. I mean, of course, there are great moments, jubilees, her wonderful cameo with James Bond at the Olympics. I mean, those are just fabulous moments. But also, she's been there when we've been in real trouble before, and I'm rather reminded at the present of what happened in 1956. The start of her reign was all wonderful coronation, everybody loved it, and then 56, Britain, France and Israel get into this total mess at the Suez Canal, trying to reclaim the Suez Canal. It's a disaster. Britain's humiliated. America is furious with Britain, threatens to devalue the pound. We are in the doghouse. What do? 10 months later, we send the Queen on a state visit to the USA, and it's a triumph. So, through her reign, you just see these moments where she was a phenomenal, unique class act.
Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Congrats on the new book out now. Robert Hardman there.
Thank you very much.
Now, concerns are growing over Britain's defence readiness, with experts warning that government spending is moving too slowly to meet current threats. Well, General Sir Richard Barrons is the former commander of Joint Forces Command and co-author of the 2025 Strategic Defence Review, and joins me now. A very good morning to you, General Sir Richard. Thanks so much for joining us. First big picture question to set it up. Is our spending too low, and by what scale?
So the heart of the problem is that we're in a really difficult new world of confrontation, such as we're seeing playing out in Ukraine and Iran. And we have arrived in this era with the armed forces that we ended up with in the much calmer post-Cold War era. So they were never going to fit. And the difference between where we are and where we need to be is a combination of transformation, because this is war in the digital age, and probably about another £10 billion a year starting now.
Is the government too slow to react to that?
So I think we all understand the government's challenge, which is lots of people in the country want to spend more money on defence. They just don't want to spend less money on anything else. And as you know, the UK fiscal situation is really tight and our economy really isn't growing. So we've got some very hard choices to make. And I think until the government is clear that the people of this country will give up other things to spend more money on defence, they are going to slow roll it, and that is really dangerous.
Sometimes in different areas of government spending, private partnerships or just private capital on its own can be a solution. Can it be a solution with defence, or does that have to be something that is driven by government?
No, it's absolutely part of the solution. There is an awful lot of private capital of various types that's very keen to invest in defence, it can see a way to a return. It's clearly not an act of charity. And what that needs are new commercial vehicles. They are being constructed. And I think more flexibility in the Treasury around some of their very restrictive rules, which are the most restrictive in Europe. But there is absolutely a way to do this.
Do we need to spend it entirely differently when the money is in to how we have done for the last decade?
We need to spend a lot of it really differently, because this is war in the 21st century. This is war in the digital age, where how you think about, build, operate armed forces is being changed as much as every other aspect of how we live, work and play by AI and data and robotics and autonomy. So the key to spending our defence money better is transformation. And you can see the effects of that in Ukraine and indeed in the war over Iran.
I want to get your take whilst we've got you, General Sir Richard, in terms of this latest promise by President Trump to blockade the Strait of Hormuz himself over the weekend. How hard will that be for him to do in practice?
Well, for something as powerful as the US Armed Forces, of course they can blockade ships trying to go to or from Iranian ports. The challenge is going to be that this will have an enormous knock-on effect to the global economy. And we should remember that China gets 50% of its oil from Iran. So in blockading Iranian ports, the US is putting China on the map in this confrontation.
So how do you think it might play out if he's really serious about it and he does effectively blockade it for the first few days of this week? Will retaliation of some form be almost inevitable?
So it's likely that we now have a double blockade. Iran will not allow the merchant vessels of countries coming from Gulf ports through the Strait of Hormuz. And we must remember, a commercial vessel isn't going to come through the Strait of Hormuz if there's any risk of being fired at in any way. It's a much higher bar to get to than for a warship. And the US will have to find a way of stopping ships going to or from Iranian ports. And then it's got to work out, well, what does it do with those ships? It's going to end up with quite a collection somewhere, probably in the Indian Ocean, quite soon. So although militarily you can do this for months, there has to be a better way.
We've been debating for weeks now whether the likely path from here is escalation or de-escalation. What is your assessment based on the failure of the talks, but this threat from President Trump? Are we more likely to see significant escalation now or not?
So I think you raise a really interesting question, because if you look at this conflict rationally, the things the US could do by armed forces, it's pretty much done. It's depleted the nuclear program, but it was never going to eradicate it. It's depleted the supply of ballistic missiles and drones, but it was never going to eradicate it. And an armed force from the air is never going to change the regime. So they strike a strong case from a US perspective of banking the things they have done, acknowledging that it's fallen short and probably this has an effect, but only for I think quite a long period of time, but only for a period of time. But that's the rational route, I think, for both sides. And let's face it, the Iranian regime is really under pressure economically, socially, militarily. But the problem with war is it's very rarely just a rational thing. And if either side think that the way out of this is fighting to save face, that takes you to down a road of escalation. And the most disturbing thing there is both sides have started to dehumanize their opponent. The American president talked about Iran as animals. And once you start to dehumanize your opponent, then all bets are off on the limits of force. It's a terrible place to go.
Just finally, General, I mean, in terms of bringing it back to the UK in light of all that we've discussed and what we need to be ready, it was something that the last Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, suggested and was sort of ridiculed for at the time. But do you think we're heading in the years ahead back to some form of conscription or training of military people by default, or is that outlandish?
So I think conscription, or talk of conscription, is the end of a very long road which we need to start down. And that road is called restoring national resilience. So we need to think through how the armed forces and civil society can be resilient in the face of attack, whether it's cyber attack or missiles. We need to think through how you can mobilize the armed forces and how they can endure in campaigns that might last for years, not months. And mostly that's about having good reserves, then knowing how you bring in volunteers. And right at the end of that road, maybe like other countries, have a model for how you would think about conscription. But it's the last step. It's absolutely not the first step.
General Sir Richard, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, lots of sport and amazing golf news as well, with Rory McIlroy winning his second Masters on the bounce. Jackie's here.
It's quite hard to say his name, actually.
I just messed it up.
This in our family, Roars.
It didn't help the fact that I was up watching it as well. That's probably why I can't talk this morning.
Me too. Very short of sleep, but so worth it, because what an amazing sporting moment. I mean, just one of those moments in history where you think, I'm so glad I watched that. That was just, it was really heartwarming. It was really emotional. Not as emotional as last year. And it wasn't straightforward. So he was still battling himself and he was still battling the Augusta course. I mean, it wasn't straightforward. We can have a look at the winning putt, actually, because he double putted the last hole. But this is the start of his round. This is the third hole where he gets the birdie. And at that point, you thought, do you know what? He's got this. He's going to go on a roll. This is the moment that he needed. But he then went on to double bogey the next hole. So actually, it was a bit up and down on the front nine. He then got it together on the back nine. This is an amazing shot at the 12th. His tee shot at the 12th. Birdie there. And also birdie at 13 as well, which followed. So really conquered Amen Corner when it had been a real troublesome spot for him earlier in the weekend. And to come back the way he did from such a disappointing rounds, having had such an amazing record-breaking lead of 6 in the third round, to then sort of bounce back and just reset himself after that disappointing third round and do this and actually see it through and over the line. That was the 2 putts at the 18th. But it didn't matter because he already had that cushion. Scotty Scheffler was hot on his heels but in the match behind him and was really trying his best to push it into a playoff, but he couldn't quite manage it. So he knew he had that cushion. And, during the day, Justin Rose was too clear. His playing partner, Cam Young, was too clear. So he didn't have things all his own way. It was only on that back nine where he suddenly looked very, very certain, very assured, very, I know what I am doing. It's just a case of not doing anything stupid, playing sensibly and playing consistently. And his iron play was so good yesterday that it was a massive improvement. And, he is a genius. He is a genius.
I love the guy. And we saw some shots there of his mum and dad, and I think that's what really got me, because, they obviously sacrificed a lot when he was a kid. There were all those stories about him, like, chipping a ball into a washing machine to practice his putting.
That's a famous shot that was actually on a TV show. There he is hugging his daughter Poppy and his wife Erica, who comes along, and it was just a very emotional walk. I don't think he could quite believe that he'd done it again. He paid tribute to his parents, because obviously if you've got a child who is so good at a sport like golf, it's expensive, and they had 2 jobs to fund his sport, and they couldn't go last year to watch him win the Masters for the first time, but they were there this time, as you can see. This is what he said in his speech afterwards, paying tribute to his mum and dad.
My mum and dad, they weren't here last year to celebrate with us, and surprisingly, I had to convince them to come this year because they thought that the reason that I won was because they weren't here. So I'm glad that we proved that wrong. But Mum and Dad, I owe everything to you. You are you're the most wonderful parents. And if I can be half the parent to Poppy as you were to me, then I know I've done a good job. Thank you.
Gets you every time, doesn't it?
Lovely.
So lovely.
So lovely.
Only the 4th man to win back-to-back Masters. Amazing. So he's already in the Legends bracket and probably the best European golfer of all time, right? Statistically.
And still young.
And still so young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we have a quick look at the football? I know you were trying to bypass it and think we'll just talk about the golf, but I think we really have to mention.
Wilf's really into the golf this morning, isn't he?
Yeah, more than I've ever been before.
We have to mention Manchester City and just how dangerous they're looking now, and how Arsenal have blown the door open for them to walk through in the title race, and they've properly walked through it. So 3 goals against Chelsea, who look kind of hapless. But, I mean, Nico O'Reilly, what a few weeks he is having, and an amazing match as well for Rain Cherky. They just look like they're coming good at the right time, and their confidence is really high, and whatever they're doing, they're so good at finishing that you have to fear for Arsenal next week, who go to the Etihad. So,
Will's talked quite a lot about the quintuple so far, which is winning the quadruple, Arsenal winning the quadruple and Tottenham going down. It feels like the most nailed one of those at the minute is Spurs going down.
Yeah, no, for the other 4, the word that's catching on, alas, is the quad bottle, which is annoyingly...
Do you want to have a look at the Spurs conceding to Sunderland? McIlroy in the 61st minute. It was Roberto De Zerbi's first
It's a great goal.
match.
Everyone likes to see it. Top bins.
Their new manager hasn't managed to change much, it seems, yet. They're in trouble. 18th place, 30 points. Above them, West Ham on 32, and above them, Forest on 32. Forest got a really valuable point yesterday against Aston Villa. It was Neco Williams in the 38th minute, and, you know, kind of deserved it because the Villa goal was no goal. So Forest are battling. They are really battling not to go down. And I think, you know, they're looking good for staying up.
It's a massive game next Sunday now, isn't it? Man City, Arsenal.
Well, it's huge. You feel like it's very much in City's hands. You know, if they get 3 points there, they've got a game in hand, and then suddenly, you know, there's no lead. So, and Arsenal need to sort of have a look at Rory's back 9, how he kind of grabbed that course and just... He could have just played really safe, but he didn't. He went for it.
And there was that wobble. There was a wobble, and I was like, oh, I think that's it now. You know, it looks like he's going to...
3 wobbles in 4 games. So it's like, OK,
no,
try again.
There has to be some kind of reset. Have a look at Rory after day 3 of the Masters, see what he did, go to the driving range, sort it out, Arsenal.
We're still going to do it.
Well, from a neutral's perspective, it is an exciting top and bottom of the Premier League table.
Premier League is just unbeatable.
Absolutely extraordinary.
Even though, obviously, the golf was great too. Jackie.
It's quite nerve-wracking, though, I tell you that.
Lovely stuff. Thank you very much. We will be back after this short break with all of the day's top stories.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty.
War isn't pretty.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
Sophy and Wilfred, good morning from both of us. Lots to update you on today.
Donald Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz from later today. He doesn't care if Iran returns to peace talks.
Viktor Orban loses the election in Hungary after 16 years in power.
Master again. Rory McIlroy makes history, taking the golfing title for the second year in a row.
Coming up, we're also going to be talking to the impressionist and comedian Rory about how children with special educational needs are ignored by the system.
Plus, eat your peas, kids. The plans to make school dinners healthy by banning fried food like fish and chips.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. So we start today with Iran and the development where Donald Trump says the US Navy will blockade the Strait of Hormuz from later today. So that's the US president threatening to use the American military to stop vessels that Iran has allowed to pass through the Strait. So Donald Trump says the blockade will begin from 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 3 p.m. here in the UK.
The President posted on Truth Social that any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be blown to hell. Peace talks, of course, over the weekend had already collapsed, with America blaming Iran's refusal to abandon its nuclear weapons program.
Now, we should say there is currently a fragile ceasefire in place between Iran and the US, but Israel, of course, continues to strike Lebanon. Donald Trump's threat now, though, risks widening the war and also pushing up oil prices, already back above $100 a barrel, and potentially causing economic pain across the world. Here he is.
Iran's in very bad shape. And just so you understand, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. Will not have. There is no way that they're going to get. They still want it. And they made that clear the other night. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. Oh, I don't know. I don't care if they come back or not. If they don't come back, I'm fine.
To Sally Lockwood, who's in Dubai for us. Sally, can you just explain how this blockade would work?
Yeah, it's a good question, Sophie. A lot of speculation in this region and something that people are watching extremely closely because, of course, you know, the Strait of Hormuz is already blockaded. So people are asking, why is Donald Trump trying to blockade a waterway that is already blockaded by the Iranians? Well, it's because since the war started, Iran has continued to export the same amount of oil as before the war. And in fact, they're charging a higher price for it. So it seems that the US now has plans to stop Iranian tankers leaving Iranian ports, and on top of that, to stop any other vessels that have paid this de facto toll to the Iranians for safe passage. And according to US defense officials, the idea behind all of this is to essentially buy the American military time to clear the Strait of Hormuz of mines and create some sort of safe passage for commercial shipping to resume, because, of course, the Strait of Hormuz was supposed to have been reopened under the terms of this ceasefire agreement, but that hasn't happened. Only a handful of vessels have passed since. And if you look at the military movement in the last 48 hours, it does seem that the US Navy is preparing for this. 2 US Navy destroyers passed the Strait of Hormuz over the weekend, the first US warships to do so since the war kicked off. There's a big US Navy presence around the Strait of Hormuz, including the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is in the Arabian Sea. And overnight, there was also an intense wave of US Air Force transport aircraft that were tracked moving towards the Middle East. So it does seem they're preparing for something significant. The big question is, how is Iran going to view this and how are they going to respond? They have a big geographical advantage because they control the entire northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. So any efforts by the US Navy could be attacked by drones. There's also these speedboats that the Revolutionary Guard have been using as attack vessels, attacking tankers in the Strait of Hormuz that don't have their authority to pass. And if indeed we do see that response from the Iranians, does it mean this ceasefire will break down? A lot of questions today. Of course, we've still got a little over a week of this ceasefire left. There is still time for another round of talks, but there is also a potential at this stage for the war to get a whole lot worse. It may become clearer when we see how this blockade works when it's supposed to come into force in a few hours' time.
Sally, thanks so much for that. Well, what does all of this mean for the markets and the oil price in particular? Unsurprisingly, talk of more blockades in the Strait of Hormuz has pushed oil prices higher to the tune of 6.5% this morning. We're back above 100, 102.5 is the level for oil prices at the moment. Worth just also dwelling on what we saw last week, or didn't see, which was only a certain fall in the oil price on what was perhaps the most optimistic moment of this conflict, when we thought the ceasefire talks were going to take place and had some optimism around that. We only fell then to $95 a barrel. And worth noting, these chopping and changes in the last few weeks, while significant on the day, they don't really make much of an indent on the move we've seen upwards since the start of the year. So go back to January. Before the war started, of course, we were about $60 a barrel. So when we have a good day and we're at 95, or when we have a bad day and we're at 102, or even worse still, you're still looking at 45 to 50 to 60% higher than where we started the year. And that means for the whole rest of this year, every single month when we print the inflation data, we're going to see it hotter than it otherwise would have been. And if we look at the next chart, that's why you're not really seeing, on good days or bad days, much change now in UK borrowing costs. This is the one-year borrowing rate for the UK gilt market. It's risen again today, back to 4.25% or so, down from the 4.5% peak a few weeks ago. But really, the thing of significance here is that we're just vastly higher from when the war started. We were down at 3.5% at the start of the war, so that was predicting a rate cut from where the Bank of England rate is at the moment, 3.75. And we're now expecting some rate hikes, whether or not it's a day when we think the ceasefire talks are going to work, or a day when we're talking about blockades again. We're just meaningfully higher on borrowing costs than we were at the start of the war. Just want to end by showing you the US stock market. In particular, we've gone for the tech-heavy NASDAQ index to show the lack of impact, really, it's had on that. For context, this was Liberation Day. This was Trump's tariffs last April. We saw a really sharp fall in the NASDAQ during that period of time. It fell 17% peak to trough in the space of less than a week. It was enough pressure on President Trump to back away and reverse course, and obviously we rallied since then. Well, peak to trough during the war for the NASDAQ was only a decline of 5.5%. In fact, last week on the optimism, we got back to essentially being flat since the war started. This hasn't priced in today's move yet. Obviously, the US market hasn't opened yet. So in the grand scheme of things, this sort of bit of volatility that we've seen over the last 6 weeks in the US stock market hasn't put that much pressure on President Trump. There's pressure coming from elsewhere, no doubt about it. But perhaps this is one of those reasons, and particularly the bounce last week, why President Trump is feeling able to put his foot down once again, talk about blockading the Strait of Hormuz himself. Of course, the other thing just to note on this, when he did decide to U-turn, take his foot off the gas last April, it was quite easy. He just had to change his tariffs. They were his tariffs. He just had to lower the rate. As we've been exploring over the course of the last 6 weeks, much harder to find an off-ramp for this particular conflict. And in light of that, this chart, the US stock market at least, perhaps showing a little bit of complacency to not see the same scale of moves as we've seen in oil prices or UK borrowing costs.
Well, perhaps given the impact it's likely to have on oil prices and the UK, we know, of course, that the UK isn't going to be involved in the blockade itself. Donald Trump's not too happy about it. And in the last few moments, Keir Starmer's been speaking as well, saying that we will not be supporting the blockade. Well, Alex is here to discuss this a bit more. I'm still trying to work out if his words there mean, as in they're not being involved in the blockade, or they don't support it in principle.
I'm not sure either, actually. I think they probably don't support it in principle, but they're not going to say that publicly. So what they are going to point to is the kind of practical elements around it. We're not supporting the blockade. All we care about is the impact of the cost of living and keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. That's what Keir Starmer wants to talk about. That's why he was in the Gulf visiting all those important leaders last week. It's about diplomatic efforts, whereas Donald Trump seems to be saying to Iran, I'm going to close it to force you to reopen it. That's not really how we do diplomacy. So what else he was saying in the Radio 5 Live? Yeah, he was talking about people facing higher energy bills. I don't want that to happen. I want the energy bills to be stabilised and lowered. And there's also this question about minesweepers. Trump said something about maybe the UK sending more. I think we have capability in there, so whether we deploy that or send more is also still a little bit uncertain.
In terms of the other item that are getting a lot of attention today, it's about whether we are or aren't moving closer to the EU and exactly the parliamentary process that will unfold in that regard.
Yeah, so there's this, but there's these reports that the government might pass a new law which would allow us to align more closely with the EU single market rules and do it through secondary legislation, which MPs can't amend. They can either just pass or reject outright. So we're already hearing a little bit of the criticism from the Conservatives. We had Kemi Badenoch on earlier. She was saying it's the worst of both worlds. And we can imagine that, you know, there's going to be criticism that we're going back into the EU by the back door, that kind of thing.
Alex, great stuff. Thanks so much. By the way, on the topic of the Iran war and exactly what's going through the president's mind in the US, stay tuned because at 12:30 we'll be speaking to Anthony Scaramucci, the former White House communications director and broadcaster and investor, and make sure to stay tuned for that.
To Hungary now, because after 16 years in power, Viktor Orban has lost the election. He is out, and Hungary's opposition party won. The leader, Peter Magyar, held a victory rally late last night.
Orban was, of course, a key ally of President Trump and also of President Putin. And the result is likely to unsettle the White House and reshape the country's relationship with the EU going forward. Ivor Bennett is in Budapest for us this morning. Ivor, a huge turnout for the election, mirrored by the celebrations by all accounts afterwards, and with it also a very significant result. This wasn't just a victory, it was a victory by a huge margin.
Yeah, that's right, Wilf. I think there'll be a few sore heads in Budapest this morning because the celebrations went long into the night. I think probably many are still celebrating. The music was pumping last night. The drinks were flowing. There was dancing in the street. It was an incredible atmosphere. And people really feel that they have reclaimed their freedom and reclaimed their future with this result. And it was a real trouncing of Viktor Orban and his Fidesz party at the polls. The opposition, the TISA party, led by a man called Peter Magyar, who will be Hungary's next prime minister, they won a supermajority, which means 2/3 at least control in parliament, meaning that they can change the constitution and undo the damage they say Orban's party did during his decade and a half in power. So a real historic moment for Hungary, historic also for Europe because of what Viktor Orban has come to represent, his brand of illiberal democracy. It was seen as a bastion of nationalist conservatism around the world. Supporters like Donald Trump, it is a setback for him. Certainly he was, Viktor Orban was Trump's closest ally in the EU. That's why he sent his Vice President J.D. Vance to Hungary last week to try and boost support for Orban. So an ideological setback for him. But for the likes of Vladimir Putin, this is a real strategic loss because Viktor Orban was essentially Moscow's man in Europe. He was seen by the rest of the EU as a Russian Trojan horse acting in Moscow's interests rather than those of Brussels. He would consistently try and block aid to Ukraine and oppose it, try and derail and slow down sanctions on Russia. So for Vladimir Putin, a real blow. But for Europe, for Brussels, this is a moment to celebrate because that persistent thorn in their side has finally been removed after 16 long years.
It really is quite a moment, isn't it, Ivor? Can I ask about the new guy in charge? How much of a change do we expect him to be from Viktor Orban?
Well, look, he's still a conservative. He's still right of centre. It's not like Hungary is going to be this kind of liberal paradise. He's still, like Orban, is against EU quotas on migration. He'll still retain the big border fence that Orban controversially constructed during his rule here. But he is still a huge, stark contrast to Viktor Orban on everything else. He fundamentally wants to turn Hungary away from Russia, back towards the West, back towards the EU, and that's why people see him as such a breath of fresh air here. And it is a moment of real change in Hungary. He's promised to boost the economy, promised to reduce corruption, to unlock the funds that were frozen by the EU because of Hungary's democratic backsliding. So for many people, it really is a watershed moment. They really feel like they've reclaimed their future.
Ivor, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Coming up, we are going to be talking to Reform's leader in Wales. That is coming up next, of course, as they gear up to elections.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Hello, welcome back. Well, in the run-up to the Welsh Senedd elections, we're going to be talking to senior representatives of all political parties. And this morning, it is the turn of Reform UK's leader in Wales. So I'm very pleased to say that Dan Thomas joins us now. Good to have you with us. So in a month's time, you could be First Minister of Wales. What would your number one priority be if that's the case?
We need to sort out the NHS. There's record waiting lists here in Wales, unfortunately. And whilst those lists are coming down very slowly, it's 40 months too long, and we need to get a grip on that. Currently, the Welsh Government's spending about £9 million on overseas offices and international aid. Well, recently there's been a huge story that's kind of rocked the NHS in Wales, and that is that half of graduate nurses won't be able to find jobs. And that's also true for our newly trained ambulance crew. So if we stop spending £9 million abroad, we can employ at least 150 to 200 nurses. So we want to put the people of Wales first by spending their tax money in Wales on the NHS.
You say your top priority is the NHS, but in your top 5 priorities in your manifesto, the NHS isn't mentioned.
Because it's a given. The NHS, we need to sort that out. And yes, we've got the priorities.
If you say that's your number 1 priority, surely it should be in the top 5 in your manifesto, shouldn't it?
No, because it is a given. It is an absolute given that we need to get the NHS down, and it is a top priority for the
maybe number 6 or 7 then. Not top 5.
Well, we could do 10, couldn't we? We could have 10 top priorities, but the ones that you refer to, in terms of the cost of living, the tax cuts, also helping our farmers. These are things that we're told day in, day out that are forgotten about. There is a lot of focus on the NHS, and as I say, it is a given that that will be our top priority.
You say you want to cut income tax by 1%. The Institute of Fiscal Studies says that this would cost as much as £420 million a year by 2030 to 31. So what cuts would you make in order to achieve that?
So initially, we're looking at about 370 million, and how we would fund that is scrapping a lot of net zero subsidies. There's net zero subsidies out there, in total costing about £145 million. There are also quangos and arm's length bodies. There's 200 arm's length and advisory bodies across Wales. Again, scrapping those could save about £135 million. And then we've got civil service pay restraint, which again, we'd save about £95 million there. So you quickly get to that £370 million figure.
I'm just coming because the IFS say, and this is not me saying it, it's them saying it, that you haven't fully faced up to the fiscal realities facing the next Welsh Government. And in order to achieve that kind of tax cuts, you'd actually have to cut funding on some frontline services, which you haven't mentioned any there. You don't accept that? You think they got it wrong?
No, we disagree with that. They've said that pretty much across all parties. And as a former council leader who has cut tax whilst retaining frontline services, whilst keeping weekly bin collections, whilst keeping all libraries open, whilst rebuilding leisure centres, I've got experience in doing this kind of thing. It can be done. It can be done. We're only talking equivalent of 1.5% of the total Welsh Government budget. So we're not talking in the scale of things. It's not a huge savings to be made. And those that I've just read out to you then, I think they are achievable. And this is why we're going to leave the tax cut to the final year of our term. So we've got 3 years to implement those savings. And whilst we're doing that, if we save the tax cut until the final year, whilst we're making in-year savings, we can redivert that money temporarily to other services as well. For instance, a surge in beds in the NHS to get those waiting lists down.
Now, you're a former Conservative. You've also taken on some ex-Tories in Wales, and obviously in Westminster you've got the likes of Robert Jenrick, Nadeem Zahawi, Nadine Dorries. Why would Welsh voters who, back in 2024 kicked out all Conservative MPs from power in Wales want the Tories back in charge?
Well, we've got 96 candidates and only a small proportion of them are former Conservatives. We've got candidates who've been in the Labour Party, Plaid Cymru, and from all different walks of life. So whilst there have been, for instance, a couple of Conservative MSs came over to us last year and earlier this year, when you look at the broader range of candidates, that accusation is not true, and we are very representative of Welsh politics.
You can see why people think that it's, the Tories back again, though, right? There's been an awful lot of them. At what point do you start saying it's too much?
Well, there's a deadline being given of the 7th of May for any other Conservatives to come across by then, and this is not. I'm not talking about any chats that may be going on right now, but it's my belief as we get closer to a general election, we'll see more Labour politicians wanting to come across. Whether we'll accept them or not is a completely different thing. But it's not in the interests, I believe, of Labour politicians right now to start, joining a different party whilst they're in government. But I think that will change as the months and years go on.
So you're glad you got in before the deadline then?
Well, I came across last year. Something happened. I'm not going to talk about it because it's in my constituency, but an event happened that really changed my view on things. And I just want a better future for my boys. And I think Wales is at a turning point, and Reform is the only party offering real change.
Well done for making sure you stayed clear of those election rules there. Thank you very much. Good to talk to you. Dan Thomas there.
You're welcome.
We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the Iran war and in particular the machinations behind the scenes in the US president's mind with Anthony Scaramucci. Don't go there. Returning to our top story again now, the war in Iran. In an astonishing development overnight, President Trump says the US Navy will blockade Iranian ports later this afternoon. The blockade is expected to begin from 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Eastern time. And the president threatening to use the military to intercept and stop vessels Iran has allowed to pass through the Strait. Let's talk about all of this with the former White House press secretary, Anthony Scaramucci, broadcaster and investor as well, of course, and joins us live from New York. A very good morning to you, Anthony. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, good morning.
Before we get into the latest developments, I'm just interested for you to frame for our audience over here quite how much pressure the president is under because of the war. Clearly, prices at the gas pump, at the petrol pump have risen. Clearly, there are economic pressures. But you look at something like the NASDAQ, and as of Friday's close, it was actually slightly up since the war began. Is he under immediate pressure or not?
Immediate pressure, I would probably say not in his mind. Pressure generally, I would say yes. But remember, he doesn't have to run for re-election, and he's not the typical political candidate where he really cares about his party's outcome. It's not clear to me that he cares one way or another if the Republicans win the midterms. I know people say, well, if he loses the Senate, he could be in trouble because of some of the corruption around him and his family. But I don't see him losing the Senate, and so he's more or less doing what he wants to do right now. Although I think his friend losing, Viktor Orban losing over the weekend, I do think weighs on him. And also, the comments that he's making about the Pope, the comments he's made about the Islamic faith. I mean, they're odd comments to me. I think that they're obviously not presidential. Most of the things he does isn't, frankly, presidential. So, I mean, that's a sign of pressure on somebody like President Trump. Those sorts of tweets and that outlandishness when it tips over into where he is now, that's where I think you're seeing the pressure come out of him.
Lots of little points I want to pick up on that you just mentioned there. But on this blockade itself, first of all, I mean, clearly this taco phrase, Trump always chickens out, you've been clear on believing that lots of times. Do you think that will play out again, not just in the months ahead with this war, but the week ahead? This blockade, is it going to last more than a day or two or not?
Listen, this is very cynical, but if you just follow what he's doing, he says things on the weekend, it feels like it's a setup for a trade, and then either prior to markets opening or shortly thereafter, he says, oh, well, we've resolved that, now we're moving on. And if you just look at that jagged edge pattern, every weekend something like this sort of happens. I'm not saying that he won't do the blockade. I understand the rationale for the blockade, not that I agree with it, but I understand his rationale. But, you know, if you look at the markets, and you're a market participant, as am I, it feels like people got short the oil market again this weekend prior to those announcements. So I'm not really sure what's going on from a regulatory response. This stuff is very easy to find. But this could be another example of that, Wolf.
I mean, clearly you're referring here to people trading in and out of oil markets and other markets during this war. We could step further back and talk about crypto legislation and businesses that his family are building. From a long way away, it's almost a surprise that some of this stuff doesn't hurt him more. Why doesn't it hurt him in the polls more?
Well, I mean, he's at 34%. If you look at the numbers, this is lower than Jimmy Carter at his low point. This is as low as Herbert Hoover was in the middle of the Depression before he was ousted from the presidency in 1932. So, I mean, it's not going to go much lower than that. The president has been right about a group of people that will more or less accept anything from him, and they'll stay supporter. Again, these are people he campaigned on ending the wars in the Middle East, lowering prices. Prices are up across the board, not just from the energy, but from the induction of his tariffs. So, and of course, we now have another war in the Middle East. God knows how long this war will last. So you know, there's a group of people that were with him when he said he wasn't going to do that, and now they're with him again when he says he's going to do that. So, but he's at a low point. Well, I mean, you look at presidential polling. I'll just point out to your viewers and listeners, you know, the Gallup poll, which has been around for 100+ years, they've stopped doing opinion polling on the president because they've got all these governmental contracts, and they don't want his ire. They don't want to lose those contracts, so they've stopped those approval rating polls. But his polls are really down, and they're historical lows. So I guess the real issue is going to be, does he care about that? And I would submit to everybody that he actually doesn't care. He's in the more nihilistic, or as you guys would probably say, nihilistic stage of his political career.
Let's touch on that Viktor Orban result over the weekend. I'm actually interested that you brought it up yourself so early in the conversation. Is it something you think President Trump really cares about?
Oh, I think he does, yes. I think those types of people he sees in sort of his... you know, you guys don't like the word fascist over there, so I'll try desperately not to use that word, but he sees that in his fanatical group, if you will. That's part of his family. He'll blame it on Vance, of course, because Vance went over there and the guy lost the election. But it really wasn't that. It was a brilliant execution of a campaign where the opposition really focused on the corruption. And this is something I would say to the Democrats here in the United States: focus on the corruption and focus on what you're going to do to improve the country and the livelihoods of your fellow citizens. Stay off of Trump because they're Trump-centric too much between you and me. I would focus more broadly on things not going well. I think that's what people could learn from the campaign in Hungary.
That was obviously one high-profile trip that the vice president has been sent on recently, the other one being to Islamabad over the weekend.
Yeah, don't invite him to your house, Wolf, because I don't know. I mean, he's got a bad track record of showing up places and then not great things happening. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. But do you think the president sent him there purposefully, particularly to Islamabad, to bind him in more to the administration's position on this Middle East war?
You know, I think so. And I think also they weren't going to accept those terms ever by what the Iranians were suggesting. So I think this was one of those things to set them up to fail, so to speak. I think you also noticed the reporting on this, which I think is pretty accurate because it's been verified in a few places, that he was in touch with the president the whole weekend, and he really didn't have a lot of proxy or room on behalf of the administration. And so even though the talks went for a very long period of time, the U.S. government was never going to accept the idea that they were going to continue to enrich uranium and make a pathway to a nuclear bomb. It just wasn't going to happen. But so there's a little bit of a setup there. And by the way, the attack on the Pope is also Vance related, because you really understand President Trump. J.D. Vance converted to Catholicism. He's considered, I'm a practicing Catholic, he's considered to be more an Orthodox Catholic. And so this attack on the Pope is also a slight on J.D. Vance. So sort of how the president does that to people. Well, if he puts everybody in the wood chipper before it's over, he has a tendency to go after everybody, including the people closest to him. And so, they're feeling it now, whether it's those podcast hosts that supported him or it's people inside the administration. That's his pattern of behavior. So all of that stuff is tightly related.
He puts everyone through it. I guess J.D. Vance has lasted a little longer than you did, Anthony, of course.
Well, he was elected. He can't fire. He's the only guy in the administration where he can't fire the guy.
Yeah, I know. I guess, but just to follow up on that point about the Pope, extraordinary, Truth Social post on it over the weekend, as you're alluding to. Does that damage him across the board in the US or not?
Well, from an electoral perspective, it definitely damages him to really understand the Catholic Church and what the Pope represents to a very large group of people inside the church. It does. Just think about Ohio, places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, very large Catholic populations. This would be a huge turnoff. And remember, if somebody like Governor Newsom gets the nomination and also a Catholic, this would be a very bad setup for somebody like Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance. But again, more evidence that the president doesn't care about the midterms or the 2028 election. I mean, I just can't imagine who in his comms team or who around him was like, hey, this is a great idea. Let's go out on Orthodox Easter, the Greek Easter, the Russian Orthodox Easter, and let's blast the papal leader. I don't know who thought that was a great idea. And I think those ramifications are going to hurt the Republicans in general. But again, it's more evidence that the president really doesn't care.
Anthony, great to see you as always. Thanks in particular for getting up early for us.
Good morning, guys. Thank you.
Anthony Scaramucci there. Very interesting, though. He doesn't care that much about, the midterms and an important point of noticing.
And also, you shouldn't invite Donald Trump to your house.
Yeah.
That
No, it was J.D. Vance.
Oh, yeah, J.D. Vance, yeah.
J.D. Vance, yeah. But both are welcome to come to our studio.
Yeah, absolutely, any time.
Yeah.
Just a few things to ask them about, including, of course, that post that Donald Trump made taking aim at Pope Leo. He was asked about it as well, and this is what he said to reporters.
We don't like it. We don't like a pope that's going to say that it's okay to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want a pope that says crime is okay in our cities. I don't like it. I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. He's a very liberal person, and he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. He's a man that doesn't think that we should be toying with a country that wants and Saudi Arabia would blow up the world. No, I'm not a fan of Pope Leo.
Well, more to come on President Trump later on, both on his comments there on the Pope and on the Iran war.
Now, the government's white paper on reforms for children with special educational needs and disabilities is now open for consultation.
Comedian Rory is hosting an event later today in Parliament to hear from the parents of some of those children that are affected, and we're delighted to say that he joins us now. Rory, a very good morning to you.
Thank you. Hello. Lovely to be in the studio with you, having been in the studio with your dad so many times.
Once a month it was it not?
Yeah, I owe him so much. So today we're making history. We go from father to son. So thank you for having me on. It's a big deal for me.
Oh, I love that. It's lovely. Great
Rory,
impression.
No, it really is great to see you. Great to have you on. And this is something you've had very close to your heart for quite some time.
Yes, I sort of advocate a lot for children with ADHD, but today it's a very special event at the House of Commons because, as you say, there's a white paper on SEND, special educational needs. And this is more talked about now. We're very aware this is something like 1 in 5, so 1.7 million children have special educational needs. Within that, you've got a sort of 1 in 20 who have an educational health care plan, which is their needs are so extreme that they need a special plan. And within that, we have the really, really vulnerable children. Not only do they have ADHD or autism or dyslexia, dyspraxia, those kind of educational needs, but also we throw in extreme anxiety, sensory overload. Some of them are violent. They're very, very vulnerable, many of them in care. So I'm expected to hear some very heartbreaking stories of children who need to have special provision in their education. And so what we want to do is to make sure that those voices are heard. So in the reforms, there's a certain sort of tendency the government, they like to sort of move towards inclusion and say, well, they should be included in the mainstream. And for some that works, but for these absolutely complex educational needs, it doesn't work for them. It's like if you say, I believe in sport, let's have inclusion in sport. It's like putting cricketers and football. Sorry to use a football analogy for you, because I know you had a very painful weekend.
What happened? What happened?
Oh God!
But it's like if you put footballers and cricketers on the same set. Say, hey, it's great, it's inclusive. It's going to wreck the cricket game, and the footballers are going to be running all over the pitch. These people have specific special needs, and in the reforms, we just want to make sure that the government doesn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And in reforming it, which was a system that was broken, Gillian Keegan, the last Education Secretary, she said it was lose-lose. We know that this system is in crisis, and the numbers are going up and up all the time. But it's now saying there are very complex children who could fall through the system and end up being amongst the million who aren't in education or employment or training.
Can I ask you what you think of the government's reforms in general? Because, look, if you talk to parents, and a lot of them will say it's a complete battle at the minute. Like you say, the system's kind of broken. Maybe some reforms are needed. Are these the right ones, or have you got concerns?
Well, it really is. I mean, it is broken. I mean, it's heartbreaking because the parents are having to fight and fight and fight to get that educational plan. And yet, when they go to tribunal, 97% of them are given the health plan. So these are cases that, on the face of it, they're absolutely, it's a slam dunk. This child needs special provision. But they're having to fight for it. Some parents who can least afford it pay from $3,000 up to $17,000 to go through tribunals to get the support for their children, and these are the most vulnerable. I think the government is acknowledging it. They're putting $4 billion in over 3 years, so they are. I think they know, they're aware of it, and they're looking to change the system about the education and health care plans. But this is the important thing: is that we have the most vulnerable children here, and they really need to have special provision. And if it's all squeezed and say, well, hang on, inclusion is good, then it doesn't work for them. These are children who mainstream won't work. And there's a piece in the Telegraph today, actually. Tragically, it's talking about some children who were kept in the mainstream, and these were violent children, extreme needs, and as we know, there was stabbings in school and some fatalities from trying to keep some of these children in the mainstream. They need special provision. They need help, and we'd all agree that education, this is the key to their lives, and it will unlock their life chances later on. And we're going to hear the stories.
Do you think? I mean, I'm sure it's an issue that everyone agrees, everyone really cares about. Do you think they're listening to some of these details, the government, or are they a bit too kind of taken up with so many complicated issues at the moment?
Oh, well, yeah, there are a lot of complicated issues, but I think we're sort of, to some extent, sort of pushing an open door in the sense that people are more aware of mental health issues, and they're particularly more aware of special educational needs, particularly as the numbers are going up. I think the government are aware of it, but we want to make sure that in these reforms, the most vulnerable, it's a very small, it's 2% of those who have an education plan. It's a very small number, but it's about making sure that that's at the forefront of the government's thinking.
And this is something you've been campaigning on for a long time, right? Why is it something that you feel so strongly about?
Well, from my own ADHD diagnosis a few years ago, I just became aware that, I mean, it's interesting, people say, oh, God, it's overdiagnosis now. It's not, it's diagnosis, because we're talking about 1 in 10 people have dyslexia, 1 in 20 have ADHD, 1 in 67 have autism. And we're understanding now that they're not so much disorders as differences. We've got these different minds, and many of them are amongst the most creative minds. And we're talking about people like Elon Musk, talking about, going back over history, sort of Mozart probably had galloping ADHD, that incredible creative restlessness, which is a brilliant thing, but in the classroom it's very difficult. So actually it's a win-win if these children, instead of being in the mainstream where they they are capable of disrupting classes. They are having their own special provision. It's a win-win for them. And these are some of the brightest minds in the case of those who are neurodiverse. You know, I think it's Francis Ford Coppola who said, the things that they exclude you from school for, the things you get lifetime achievement awards for later in life.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to transform. It's what you call a six-pointer, isn't it? When you can flip it.
Yeah.
So that instead of people going from classroom to courtroom and getting into the criminal justice system, and it's cost, I think, 180,000, I think, to put somebody through for a year to keep somebody in prison. It's significantly less than that to when they're a child in education, to say, you will get the special provision that you need. We need to hear their stories. That's what today's about.
It's fantastic, and we hope the event goes very well, Rory. Whilst we've got you, just wanted to switch very quickly.
While we've got you.
Yeah, we were talking a lot about this upcoming state visit. King Charles, President Trump will be covering it, but, you know, to be a fly on the wall inside a room with just the two of them talking privately.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Wilf. I love Charles. I know him very well. I knew his mother. His mother, she loved me, by the way. She said, Donald, you're like the son I never had. Yeah. You're kind of like one of the sons I did have, actually. That's that one. And so, and you can imagine, we did enjoy your last visit. At least I hope it's your last visit. But you know, it's great. And Charles is a great, I mean, such a Charles I think that's his full title. I don't know what the I stands for, but I'm Donald J. Trump. You know what the J stands for? Genius, right?
So good.
We're going to have a great time. We're going to look after him, and the ballroom won't be ready, but we're hoping he won't put a foot wrong.
That's amazing.
Fantastic.
Absolutely amazing.
Round of applause from me,
That was
Rory.
brilliant.
Listen,
Can you come up every month like you did for
yeah,
Start?
best times of my life. Loved that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I miss those days. But anyway, the world's all fine now, isn't it? We don't need satire. It's all tripping along so merrily. And
going really well.
It's a beautiful world, and it's great, and it's changed. You know, rules-based system's gone. We've got 6 men in their 70s.
Well, Dad loved every weekly show because you know he loves the job, but I think he loved the end of the month shows the most when you used to come on.
Top of the morning. Good morning.
On that note, Rory,
legend.
Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Really great to see you. We're going to take not a break yet. We're going to have a quick look at the weather first of all.
I hope we haven't forgotten anything.
Travel insurance, I tick that box.
Yeah, but remember what you forgot last year.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
The next few days will bring showers or more prolonged rain, but later this week there are signs of something more settled and warmer. Expect a mostly fine morning, if a little chilly after a frosty start for some, but there'll be a few showers around. They'll develop more widely by lunchtime, but there'll be sunny spells too. Temperatures will be near average, but it should feel more pleasant with lighter winds than the weekend. The afternoon will bring further showers, locally heavy, with hail and thunder possible.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Well, coming up on Sport with Jackie, bit of golf.
Oh, my goodness, what a night. It was definitely worth missing a night's sleep for because he's got his second Masters and only the fourth man to ever win back-to-back Masters. And I thought you'd get a new green jacket. You just get the old one put back on.
Do you actually? Oh.
Yeah, I think so. We'll have the action from that. We'll show you how he did it. And a bit of football as well. Good news for Man City fans, not so good for Arsenal.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky Security and Defence Editor. The reality of life under Russian fire. People don't want to leave even though help is here to evacuate them. They say they want to sort out their belongings first. It's absolute chaos. Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety as Russian drones will be trying to find this position.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I've been covering Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war. Conflict in the Middle East is another major focus.
An incredibly dangerous moment. We saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercept going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful.
With global threats rising, I also explored defence and security in the UK and across NATO. This US aircraft carrier is operating in European waters in a deliberate show of force.
This is routine training for NATO, but should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans. The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments took the threat of nuclear attack and global conflict.
Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't.
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hello, and thank you for watching. Tonight on The Wrap, we will be joined by the very best commentators to explain the how and the why. He did know what he was doing. Both agree on that, can we?
No.
No. We can expect more analysis.
This is going to get deeper. I think it's going to end up with Russia.
Is war inevitable? What he's interested in is a deal.
That doesn't rule out strikes.
I disagree. And laughs along the way.
Plus, a look at tomorrow's headlines. The Wrap. Everything wrapped up for you from 10.
We're trying to see as much as we can. We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting. The whole neighborhood is rallied around her. It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan. Been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming. It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Welcome back. Time for the sport. And Jackie, one story dominates. Rory McIlroy.
Absolutely, winning the Masters for a second time last night. And what was really good was the fact that, you know, he had 2 good rounds. Then he had a 3rd round that was not so good. And that fantastic, you know, lead that he had was whittled away. He went back to the driving range after that round and did a whole load of practice for a really long time and made adjustments and corrected whatever wasn't going right for him. So when he went out for the 4th round, it was like a different Rory, and he seemed pretty much in control. So this is him at the 3rd yesterday for birdie. But then it was a bit of a roller coaster because he followed that up with a double bogey on the 4th. So there were drop shots on the front 9, there were birdies on the front 9. But when he really sort of got a grip of it was around Amen Corner, and he attacked those holes, and it was really, really excellent from him. So at the 12th, great tee shot at the 12th. Have a look at this. Setting up a birdie there. Yeah, just about perfect. And then he follows that up with a 13th and a birdie there. So at that point, even though the lead had sort of changed between Justin Rose was in the lead for a little bit by 2 shots, and Cam Young, who he was playing with, was in the lead by 2 shots. But at that point, you just knew, you've got this. He's very sure. He's very on it. He absolutely is unflustered. So when he got to the final hole, he could 2-putt that and it was fine. And he was left with that little tiddler just enough. Scotty Scheffler was always lurking, but he couldn't quite get up to him yesterday. So I think huge, huge relief. Can't quite believe it. Big celebrations, and he joins that very elite club of only, you know, the 4th man to win back-to-back.
Oh, and I love Rory. And I have to say, it didn't really do well for my sleeve.
No.
Look at, this is a lovely, lovely picture there of him with his daughter.
With Poppy.
It's fair to say, isn't it? I mean, this is the course, right, when it comes to golf. Is it fair to say that he had a few demons here before that maybe he shook off by winning it the last time?
Oh, yeah, completely.
Well, they came back a bit, though, didn't they?
I mean, they always do, but I think that's how Rory plays. Yeah. It's just, you know, he's so good at rescuing bad situations, so much better than other people that, in a way, it sort of doesn't matter, but sometimes it does matter. And when he was, you know, when he was 21, he had a full shot lead here on the 3rd day, and he blew it. So that took a long time to get over. What was very lovely was that last year his mum and dad couldn't go to watch him win it, but he persuaded them to come this year, which they were very reluctant to do because they thought there might be sort of a bit of a jinx. But they did come, and in his speech afterwards, he paid tribute to his mum and dad. Let's have a look.
My mum and dad, they weren't here last year to celebrate with us, and surprisingly, I had to convince them to come this year because they thought that the reason that I won was because they weren't here. So I'm glad that we proved that wrong. But Mum and Dad, I owe everything to you. You are you're the most wonderful parents. And if I can be half the parent to Poppy as you were to me, then I know I've done a good job. Thank you.
Just gets me. It's so lovely.
I know. It's so
lovely.
it's just very natural, isn't he? And wears his heart on his sleeve and makes mistakes like everyone. He's not he's not a robot. Speaking of robots, well, they're not actually, but they're just very good. Manchester City. When going gets tough at the end of the season, they really get going. And they had a very, very important win, possibly yesterday against Chelsea, 3-0. Nick O'Reilly, what a couple of weeks he's having. Mark Gay and Jeremy Doku, the scorers. 2 assists from Ryan Cherky. I mean, Arsenal left the door open for City to walk right through it in the race for the title, and they did. Mm-hmm. And now they've got to play them next weekend, and they are looking very good, and Arsenal are looking very fragile, and that makes up for a very interesting end, nerve-wracking / interesting end to the season.
How would you describe it for you? How's it going to be for you, Wilf, as an Arsenal fan?
Yeah, very stressful. Very stressful.
Well, more stressful for those players. Probably more stressful for Spurs as well. Robert De Zerbi's first game in charge, same result. Have not won this year. Did not win at Sunderland. Very hard place to go, in all honesty. But Mukiele's 61st minute goal was their undoing yesterday, and they are in trouble. 18th place on 30 points, above them West Ham on 32. Above them, they also played and got a valuable point yesterday, is Nottingham Forest on 33 points. So it is very congested at the bottom. We'll have a quick look at Forest getting their equaliser, having scored an own goal against Villa at Villa Park. They got that, that point could be so very valuable come the end of the season. And it really is set up for the neutral very nicely. But there are a lot of Arsenal memes around.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Spurs memes around. There's an awful lot of, Arsenal crumbles. I keep getting sent pictures of Arsenal crumbles.
I was in Spain for Easter, and even Spanish kids were coming up to me talking to me about Spurs. It's a bad time to be a Spurs fan.
We are out of time. Much more to come on the other side of this on Sky News Today. So.